Hello guys, welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Ash saved Sabrina's soul and she became obsessed with marrying him. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The Heart in the Dollhouse. The silence was the first thing that hit you. It wasn't the quiet of a library or the hush of a sleeping town. Saffron City's silence was a living thing, a predator. It stalked the wide, immaculate avenues, choked the laughter from children's throats, and clung to the pristine glass of the skyscrapers like a shroud. People moved with a placid, unnerving grace, their faces smooth and empty, their eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the horizon. They didn't jostle. They didn't shout. They flowed around each other like water, part of a current directed by an unseen will. Ash Ketchum felt it as a pressure against his skin, a low hum at the edge of his hearing that made the hairs on his arms stand up. It was the same wrongness he'd felt a week ago, just before everything had gone sideways. "I still don't like this," Misty muttered, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her usual fiery demeanor was banked, replaced by a wary tension. "It feels like the whole city is holding its breath." "It's more than that," Brock added, his gaze sweeping over the pedestrians drifting past them. He adjusted the pack on his shoulders. "It's like they're not all there. You try to catch someone's eye and they just look through you." Ash didn't reply. He was watching a trio of businessmen in identical gray suits walk in perfect, synchronized lockstep, their briefcases swinging in the same rhythm. He remembered the feeling from his first challenge, that cloying, mental fog that dulled your thoughts, that whispered of the futility of resistance. He'd walked into the Saffron gym brimming with a confidence earned through hard-fought victories, and had walked out with a crushing defeat and a creeping dread that had little to do with losing a Pokemon battle. Pikachu, perched on his usual spot on Ash's shoulder, twitched his ears, a low, unhappy rumble in his chest. He felt it too. The air was thick with static, a psychic residue that left a metallic taste in the back of your throat. "You're sure about this, Ash?" Misty's voice was softer now, laced with genuine concern. "We could go to Cinnabar. Get the volcano badge first. There's no shame in coming back later." Ash finally stopped, turning to face his friends. The haunted look that had shadowed his features for days was gone, replaced by a sharp, crystalline focus. "No. It has to be now." He met Misty's gaze, then Brock's. "Last time, I went in to win a badge. I treated it like any other gym. That was the mistake." Brock frowned. "What other way is there to treat it? She's a gym leader." "She's not just a gym leader," Ash countered, his voice low and certain. "She's a nexus. Everything in this city, all of this," he gestured to the unnervingly serene street. "It all comes from her. The gym isn't a stadium, it's a den. And we walked right into it." He remembered the battle with a clarity that still made his stomach clench. Kadabra hadn't moved a muscle. It had just stood there, spoon in hand, and Pikachu had been twisted into knots by an invisible force, his own thundershocks turned back on him. It wasn't a battle of speed or power. It was a contest of wills, and Ash's had been found wanting. The mocking, hollow voice of Sabrina echoing in his skull, the cold dismissal, the teleportation that had unceremoniously dumped them in the city's outskirts. That wasn't a loss. It was an eviction. "So what's the plan?" Misty asked, stepping closer. "You didn't go to Lavender Town to get a haunter like that man suggested. What are we going to do differently?" Ash's hand went to the pokeball on his belt, his thumb stroking the smooth surface. "Last time, I fought the Pokemon. This time, I'm focusing on the trainer." He looked toward the monolithic golden building that dominated the city center, the Saffron Gym. "Something's wrong with her. Deeply wrong. You can feel it. It's not just power, it's pain. A cold, lonely pain that's so loud it's silent. Brock and Misty exchanged a look. This was a different Ash than the one they were used to. The brash, headstrong kid was still there, but he was tempered by an unnerving perceptiveness. It was a quality that had been growing in him, a strange knack for understanding the heart of a situation that went beyond simple strategy. He called it instinct. They were beginning to wonder if it was something more. "All right, Ash," Brock said, his expression firming with resolve. "We're with you. All the way." Misty nodded, a spark of her usual fire returning. "Just say the word, and Starmie will wash this whole creepy place out." A ghost of a smile touched Ash's lips. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." He turned and started walking again, his pace brisk and decisive. "Let's go finish this." The gym was even worse than the city outside. The antechamber was a vast, cavernous space lined with columns that seemed to absorb the light. At precise intervals, men and women in stark black robes stood motionless, their heads bowed, their faces hidden in shadow. They didn't move. They didn't breathe. Ash wasn't even sure they were real. The pressure was immense now, a physical weight that made it hard to think, hard to focus. It was a psychic scream that had been held for so long it had become a dense, crushing silence. At the far end of the hall, a man in a sharp suit and a harried expression paced back and forth. He wrung his hands, his face a mask of anxiety. He spotted them and rushed forward, his relief palpable. "You're back," he exclaimed, his voice a jarring intrusion in the oppressive quiet. "Thank goodness. I was hoping you would be." Ash recognized him as Sabrina's father, the man who had first warned them away, and then, in a desperate whisper, begged them to come back and save his daughter. "We're here for a rematch," Ash stated, his voice ringing with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. The man's face fell. "A battle? My boy, you don't understand. This isn't about badges anymore. Her powers, they're growing. The other part of her, the cold part, it's almost completely taken over. She barely speaks. She just sits in there, in the dark. Please," he begged, his voice cracking. "You have to help her. You're a good kid, I can see it. You have a light about you. Maybe you can get through to her." "First, the battle," Ash insisted, his jaw set. He understood the man's desperation, but this wasn't something he could fix with a kind word. Power had to be met with power. A challenge had been issued and refused. To gain her respect, to even get her to see him as something other than an insect to be brushed aside, he had to meet her on the field she understood. He had to make her listen. The father's shoulders slumped in defeat. He gestured weakly toward a large set of ornate double doors. "Very well. But be careful. She's not in a playful mood." He pushed the doors open, and the three trainers stepped through. The arena was a perfect circle of polished black marble under a domed ceiling that showed a starless, midnight sky. In the center, on a raised dais that resembled a throne, sat Sabrina. She was exactly as he remembered, and 1,000 times more unsettling. A young woman, perhaps only a few years older than himself, with long, raven-black hair cascading over a simple, dark dress. Her skin was pale as porcelain, her face an expressionless mask. But it was her eyes that held you captive. They were dark, bottomless pools, devoid of any light or emotion. She held a single, flexing spoon in her hand, her focus entirely on it. When she looked up, her gaze slid over Brock and Misty as if they were furniture, before settling on Ash. A cold, sterile curiosity flickered in those empty depths. In her lap, a small, blonde-haired doll in a pink dress sat propped against her leg. "You returned," she said. Her voice wasn't a voice. It was a sound that simply appeared in their minds, flat and devoid of inflection. "The outcome will not change." "We'll see about that," Ash shot back, striding to the challenger's box. "1-on-1. Your Kadabra against my Pikachu. Let's go." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Sabrina's lips. It was a terrifying sight, like a crack appearing in a flawless statue. If you insist on wasting my time. She made a subtle, dismissive gesture. From the shadows behind her throne, a figure emerged. It was the same Kadabra from before, lean and yellow, its eyes glowing with a faint red light. It held a silver spoon in its hand, its tail twitching lazily. It took its place on the field, its expression utterly blank, a mirror of its master. Pikachu, I choose you. Ash commanded. Pikachu leaped from his shoulder, landing nimbly on the marble floor. Sparks crackled from his red cheeks, his body tense and ready. Pikachu, he cried, a defiant spark of energy in the dead air of the arena. The rules are simple, Ash declared, his eyes locked on Sabrina, not on her Pokémon. The battle is over when one Pokémon is unable to continue. Sabrina's mental voice echoed. The battle is over when I decide it is. The air grew heavy. The pressure intensified tenfold. Ash felt a wave of dizziness, a disorienting psychic push designed to throw him off balance. He gritted his teeth, planting his feet firmly. He focused on the warmth in his chest, a small, defiant flame he'd learned to nurture. He pushed back, not with force, but with simple, stubborn presence. I am here. You will not move me. The pressure receded slightly. A flicker of surprise, so fleeting Ash might have imagined it, crossed Sabrina's face. Pikachu, agility, then quick attack. Ash roared. Pikachu became a yellow blur, zigzagging across the arena floor at impossible speeds, leaving faint electrical trails in his wake. He shot toward Kadabra like a lightning bolt. Sabrina didn't give a command. Kadabra's eyes glowed. Just as Pikachu was about to connect, he slammed into an invisible wall, recoiling with a pained yelp. Predictable, Sabrina's voice droned. Don't stop, Pikachu. Circle him. Use your speed. Pikachu recovered instantly, his training and battle instincts taking over. He began to race around Kadabra in a wide circle, a whirlwind of yellow fur. Now, Thunderbolt. Full power. Pikachu leaped into the air, his body arching as he unleashed a massive bolt of golden electricity. It wasn't aimed at Kadabra. It was aimed at the floor all around him, a cage of pure energy. The attack struck the marble, spiderwebbing across the surface in a blinding flash. For a moment, the psychic pressure wavered, disrupted by the sheer electrical output. Kadabra flinched, its concentration broken. Now, Pikachu. Iron Tail. Ash seized the opening. Pikachu spun in mid-air, his tail glowing with a hard, metallic sheen. He descended like a silver meteor, swinging the hardened appendage directly at Kadabra's head. This time, the attack connected. There was a sickening crack as metal met bone. Kadabra was thrown backward, skidding across the polished floor and landing in a heap, its spoon clattering away. It twitched, then lay still. Silence. Brock's jaw was on the floor. He did it. He actually did it. Misty was pumping her fist. Yeah. Way to go, Ash. Ash felt a surge of triumph, but it was short-lived. He looked at Sabrina. Her expression hadn't changed. She gazed at her fallen Pokémon with the same detached curiosity she might afford a fallen leaf. Then, slowly, she raised her eyes to meet his. The coldness in them intensified, dropping the temperature in the room by 20 degrees. You broke my toy, she stated, her mental voice laced with a chilling, infantile petulance. Now. I'll break yours. Before Ash could react, the world dissolved. The black marble floor, the star-dusted ceiling, the very walls of the gym seemed to bend and warp as if made of soft wax. Colors bled into one another. The air shimmered and twisted. Ash felt a nauseating lurch, as if the entire planet had just dropped 100 feet. Ash, what's happening? Misty shrieked, her voice sounding distant and distorted. He turned just in time to see it. A wave of shimmering, purple energy washed over his friends. Brock's cry of alarm was cut short as his body began to shrink, his limbs stiffening, his skin taking on the texture of hard plastic. Misty suffered the same fate, her face frozen in a mask of terror as she was reduced in size, her vibrant hair becoming molded, painted plastic. In seconds, they were gone. In their place, standing on the warping floor, were two dolls, no more than a foot high. A Brock doll, arms locked in a perpetually surprised pose, and a Misty doll, her mouth open in a silent scream. Ash's blood ran cold. Brock. Misty. Sabrina's laughter echoed in his head. It wasn't a sound of mirth. It was the dry, rasping sound of a machine attempting to mimic emotion. They are much quieter this way. Easier to play with. The world solidified again, but it was no longer the gym. It was a mockery of one. Ash stood in the center of a gigantic, perfectly rendered miniature of Saffron City. The skyscrapers were as tall as he was, the streets wide enough to walk down. He looked up and saw the gym's domed ceiling far, far above, a fake night sky for this terrible dollhouse. And towering over the edge of the miniature city, her head brushing the distant ceiling, was Sabrina, a goddess of this new, twisted reality. Her doll sat in her lap, watching the proceedings. She reached down with a slow, deliberate movement and picked up the tiny figures of Brock and Misty. She dangled them between her thumb and forefinger, inspecting them. Perfect, she purred. Now they can join the others. She placed them carefully on the roof of a miniature building, where they stood, frozen and silent. A rage unlike anything he had ever felt surged through Ash. It was hot and pure, burning away the psychic fog and the fear. Change them back, he snarled, his voice a low growl. Change them back, now. Sabrina's colossal face tilted. Why? They have no more pain. No more fear. No more annoying voices. They are at peace. I have made them perfect. Pikachu. Ash yelled, pointing a trembling finger at the giantess. Thunderbolt. As much as you've got. Pikachu didn't hesitate. He unleashed a torrent of electricity that dwarfed his previous attack, a massive, roaring river of lightning that shot upward, striking Sabrina square in the chest. The giant figure didn't even flinch. The electricity crackled over her form and dissipated harmlessly. Your anger is pointless. Your power is insignificant. She raised her hand, and Kadabra, now fully recovered and standing beside her, had its eyes glow. The spoon in its hand began to bend. In the dollhouse city below, Pikachu cried out in pain. He was lifted into the air, his body twisting and contorting at an unnatural angle, held fast by an invisible psychic grip. Pika, he squeaked, his voice strained. Stop it. Let him go. Ash screamed, helpless. It is time to play, Sabrina's voice echoed, and she began to lower her hand toward the miniature city, her fingers spread as if to crush the building Ash was standing on. This was it. This was how it ended. Trapped in a madwoman's toy box, about to be crushed like a bug. Desperation clawed at him. He couldn't fight her power. He couldn't reason with her. What was left? What had her father said? You have a light about you. Maybe you can get through to her. He looked at Pikachu, struggling against the psychic bonds, his little body trembling with effort but still refusing to give up. He looked at the frozen forms of his friends. He looked at the giant, impassive face of Sabrina, a queen in her kingdom of loneliness. The pain, a cold, lonely pain. That was it. That was the key. He couldn't win by fighting the storm. He had to find its eye. Pikachu. Ash yelled, his voice raw with desperation and a dawning, frantic idea. I need one more attack. Not at her. At the throne. Where the doll is. Aim everything you have right there. Pikachu, caught in Kadabra's psychic, couldn't move his body, but he could still summon his power. He let out a defiant roar. KKCHUUUUUUUU. It wasn't a bolt. It was a cataclysm. Every last ounce of his bioelectricity erupted from him in a blinding, uncontrollable nova of pure power. The golden energy didn't just strike the throne in the real world, far above, it overloaded the entire psychic projection. The dollhouse world flickered like a dying light bulb. The air crackled, and for a single, heart-stopping second, Ash saw it. The illusion shattered, and he was no longer in the toy city. He was adrift in a black, starless void. It was colder than space, a crushing, absolute emptiness. In the distance, he saw two figures. One was a towering, monstrous version of Sabrina. Not a giant, but a perfect, porcelain doll, 20 feet tall, its face flawless and utterly without emotion, its eyes black holes of nothingness. This was the entity he had been fighting, the cold tyrant. It radiated an aura of absolute control, order, and suffocating silence. And huddled at its feet, almost invisible in its shadow, was the other figure. A little girl, no older than 6 or 7, with the same black hair as Sabrina. She was crying, her small body racked with silent, tearless sobs. She clutched a bent spoon to her chest like a shield, her eyes squeezed shut in terror. The tyrant doll turned its head, its movements stiff and unnatural. It fixed its dead eyes on Ash. Its voice was not in his head this time, it was the void itself speaking. You do not belong here. An immense force slammed into Ash's consciousness, trying to eject him, to erase him. It was the psychic equivalent of a continental plate grinding against him. He felt his being start to fray at the edges. But then, he felt something else. A warmth in his chest, that small flame he had been nurturing, flared into an inferno. It wasn't his anger. It was something purer. An energy that connected him to Pikachu, to his friends, to the very essence of life. It flooded his senses, not with power, but with clarity. Aura. The force of the tyrant's will was a hammer, but the aura was a current, flowing around it, finding the cracks. And through that connection, he didn't just see the little girl, he felt her. He felt the crushing loneliness, the terror of her own burgeoning power, the desperate wish to shut out a world that was too loud, too painful, too demanding. He felt the pressure from her father, the whispers of the people in black, the fear she saw in the eyes of others. He felt the moment she had decided it was better to feel nothing at all, the moment she had created the doll to protect herself, only for the doll to become her jailer. He ignored the towering tyrant. He ignored the crushing pressure. With a will he didn't know he possessed, he forced his consciousness to move. He walked through the void, his steps sure and steady, his focus entirely on the source of the pain. He walked right past the leg of the giant doll construct, which radiated a cold that should have frozen his soul. He didn't even look at it. He stopped in front of the little girl. He knelt. The void was silent, but here, next to her, he could hear the echo of her weeping, a sound of utter despair. He reached out, not with his physical hand, but with the essence of himself, a projection of the warm, blue light that now enveloped him. He didn't speak into the void. He spoke to her heart. I see you, he sent, the thought a simple, gentle wave. The little girl flinched, curling into a tighter ball. You're scared, he continued, his own heart aching with a profound, shared sorrow. You're all alone in here, and you're so scared. She looked up, her eyes wide and full of tears. They weren't the empty pits of the gym leader, they were the terrified, expressive eyes of a child lost in the dark. The giant doll tyrant loomed over them, raising a hand to obliterate the intrusion. Be gone. Ash didn't flinch. He kept his focus entirely on the girl. He held out his hand, an offering of pure, unconditional empathy. You don't have to be alone anymore, he thought, his voice full of a conviction that was the truest thing he had ever known. Take my hand. Please. Let me help. The little girl stared at his outstretched, luminous hand. She looked from his hand to his face, a face that held no judgment, no fear, only a deep, resonant compassion. She looked up at the towering, cold doll that was her prison and her protector. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she made a choice. Hesitantly, she reached out her own small, trembling hand and placed it in his. The moment their fingers touched, the world exploded. Not in fire, but in light. A tidal wave of pure, brilliant, warm light that blasted outward from their point of contact. The cold void was not destroyed, it was filled. The oppressive silence was not broken, it was replaced by a symphony of feeling. Joy, sadness, anger, hope, fear, love, a chaotic, messy, beautiful cacophony of life flooded the nothingness. The giant doll construct let out a silent, agonized scream. Cracks of brilliant light raced across its porcelain skin. It was a creature of absolute order, and it could not exist in a world of emotional chaos. With a final, shuddering implosion, it disintegrated into a billion motes of shimmering dust. Ash felt a violent, disorienting pull, and his senses came rushing back to him with the force of a tidal wave. He was on his knees on the cool, black marble of the saffron gym. The air was still, but it was a normal stillness now, the heavy, psychic pressure completely gone. Across the arena, Kadabra was stirring, shaking its head as if waking from a long dream. Near the wall, Brock and Misty were picking themselves up off the floor, looking dazed and confused but blessedly human. "Ugh, my head," Brock groaned, rubbing his temples. "What happened? Last thing I remember is, shrinking." "Me too," Misty said, looking down at her hands in disbelief. "Ash. Are you okay?" Ash pushed himself to his feet, his legs shaking. His head was pounding, his body felt drained, but the warmth in his chest still lingered, a comforting ember. He looked toward the throne. It was empty. He followed a sound, a soft, choked noise he'd never heard in this place before. It was the sound of weeping. Sabrina was curled on the floor at the base of her dais, her face buried in her hands. Her body was racked with deep, shuddering sobs. They weren't the silent tears of the girl in the void, they were wrenching, gasping, messy sobs of someone who hadn't cried in a lifetime. The sound was raw, painful, and profoundly human. Her father, who had been cowering by the entrance, rushed forward. "Sabrina. My child." He knelt beside her, but he hesitated to touch her, as if still afraid. Slowly, her sobs subsided. She took a deep, shuddering breath and lowered her hands. She pushed her hair back from her face and looked up. Her eyes, which had been empty voids, were now a startling, vibrant dark brown, shimmering with unshed tears and a terrifying, newborn intensity. They were filled with confusion, pain, and a dawning, ravenous awareness. Her gaze swept past her father, past Brock and Misty, and locked onto Ash. It was a look of such focused, absolute concentration that it felt like a physical touch. He had been the anchor in her storm, the hand she had taken in the darkness. He was the first thing her whole, reintegrated soul had truly seen. Slowly, shakily, she rose to her feet. She took one step, then another, her movements clumsy, like a fawn testing its legs for the first time. She walked across the marble floor, her eyes never leaving his. The silence in the gym returned, but this time it was a silence of stunned, breathless anticipation. She stopped directly in front of him, so close he could see the faintest tremor in her lips. She smelled of ozone and unshed tears. She just stared at him for a long, unbearable moment, her gaze drinking him in, imprinting his face, his presence, onto her very being. Then, she raised a trembling hand and pointed a single, elegant finger at the center of his chest. Her voice, when she spoke, was not a psychic projection. It was real, audible, and though it was raspy from disuse, it held a terrifying, absolute certainty that chilled Ash to his very bones. "You saved me," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "You are mine now." She took another small step, her eyes wide and unwavering. We will be married. Chapter 2, The Unwanted Empress. The aftermath in the saffron gym was a study in shattered realities. Brock and Misty were leaning against a column, still trying to reconcile the phantom sensation of being plastic with the solid reality of their own flesh and bone. Sabrina's father was fluttering around his daughter, a frantic moth drawn to a terrifying new flame, babbling about doctors and rest and how everything was going to be better now. And in the center of it all stood Ash, frozen in place, with the world's most powerful psychic having just declared him her future husband with the casual finality of someone stating the sun would rise tomorrow. Was all Ash could manage. It felt wholly inadequate. Pikachu, recovered and back on his shoulder, let out a low, questioning, "Pika." He nudged Ash's cheek, as if to ask, "Did I hear that right?" Sabrina's focus was absolute. The background noise of her father's panic and his friend's bewildered muttering might as well have been on another planet. Her world had collapsed into the space between her and Ash. He was the single, solid point in her newly reformed universe. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Ash said, forcing the words out. He took a half step back. "I'm really glad you're feeling better. Truly. But the marriage thing. I'm 10. And I don't even know you." A flicker of confusion crossed her face. It was the first genuine expression he'd seen on her that wasn't abject terror or a soul-deep sob. "You were inside my soul. You held my hand in the darkness. You are the only person who is not loud inside my head. I know you better than I know myself." She tilted her head, a gesture that was now unnervingly bird-like and curious, rather than robotic. "The details are irrelevant. The conclusion is sound. We will be married." "No," Ash said, more firmly this time. "We won't be." The air in the gym grew heavy again. It wasn't the oppressive, malevolent pressure from before, but a focused, intense concentration, like the air before a lightning strike. Ash felt an invisible force wrap around his ankles, rooting him to the spot. He tried to move his leg and found it locked in place. "This is not a negotiation," Sabrina stated, her voice still quiet but now holding a steel edge of absolute authority. The child who had made the statement was now backed by the Empress who had ruled a city. "You are the anchor. You will stay." "Sabrina, honey, please," her father pleaded, finally noticing the shift in atmosphere. "Let the boy go. He's our guest. He saved you." "He did," Sabrina agreed, not taking her eyes off Ash. "And now he is mine to keep. It is the logical progression." Misty finally shook off her stupor. "Hey! You can't just decide to marry someone. And you definitely can't hold him hostage." She took a step forward, her hand reaching for a pokeball on her belt. Sabrina's head snapped toward her. The temperature in the room plummeted. Misty froze, her hand hovering over her belt. She paled, a look of pure terror on her face. Ash knew, instinctively, what she was feeling. It was a psychic spike, a direct, non-negotiable command of stay out of this driven into her mind with the force of a nail gun. Ash saw the fear in his friend's eyes and knew he was out of options. Arguing was pointless. Fighting was suicide. He was dealing with someone whose understanding of social interaction was a complete and utter void. She wasn't being malicious, she was acting on the only two emotions she currently understood, the terror of being alone again, and the fierce, possessive attachment to the one who had saved her from it. He had to change tactics. He relaxed his body, letting the tension drain from his shoulders. He met Sabrina's intense gaze and forced himself not to look away. "Okay," he said, his voice calm. "Okay. You win." The pressure around his ankles vanished. Misty gasped, stumbling back a step, freed from the mental assault. Sabrina's expression softened, the hard edge of command replaced by a placid, certain satisfaction. "But," Ash continued, raising a hand. "There are conditions. Rules. Where I'm from, you don't just get married. There's a journey. A pilgrimage. You have to travel the world together, see the sights, prove you're compatible. He was making it up as he went along, pulling from a half-remembered conversation Brock had once had about courting rituals in some distant region. It's a long process. Very long. Sabrina considered this. Her new, expressive eyes narrowed in thought. A journey. To prove compatibility. She nodded slowly. This is an acceptable protocol. It will allow me to observe your habits and ensure a smooth integration into my life. Ash let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Great. It's a deal. So, our journey continues. On the road. Tomorrow. We will depart now, she corrected him. No, we'll depart tomorrow. My friends and I are exhausted. We need to rest. That's part of the protocol, he added, hoping the word sounded official enough. She stared at him for a long moment, and he could feel her probing his mind. It wasn't the aggressive violation from before, but a curious, gentle touch, like a blind person tracing the shape of a new object. He focused on the image of his bed at the Pokemon Center, on the feeling of exhaustion in his bones. He projected tiredness with all his might. Finally, she gave another slow nod. The need for biological regeneration is logical. We will depart at sunrise. I will meet you at the city's edge. She turned, her movements still a little stiff, and glided toward a door behind her throne without another word, her father scrambling to follow. The moment she was gone, Brock and Misty rushed to Ash's side. Ash, are you insane? Misty hissed, her voice a frantic whisper. An acceptable protocol. You just agreed to let a psychic time bomb who wants to marry you follow us across the country. What was I supposed to do, Misty? Say no and end up as a doll in her toy collection permanently? Ash shot back, rubbing his ankles. She's not stable. Yelling at her is like yelling at a landslide. You can't win, you just have to get out of its way. He's got a point, Brock said, his expression grim. I've never seen power like that. She wasn't even trying. When she looked at you, Misty. I felt the chill from across the room. She could have broken your mind without a second thought. Misty shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. So what's the plan? We just let her tag along. Ash looked at the door Sabrina had disappeared through. The warmth in his chest, the lingering touch of aura, pulsed faintly. He remembered the terrified little girl in the void. He had made her a promise. You don't have to be alone anymore. He hadn't meant it literally, but she clearly had. For now, yes, Ash said, his voice heavy with a responsibility that felt 10 times weightier than any gym badge. We let her tag along. And we hope we can teach her how to be a person before she decides we'd all be better off as lawn ornaments. The journey from Saffron to Celadon City was, for the first few hours, an exercise in supreme awkwardness. Sabrina had met them at the city gate precisely as the first rays of sun broke the horizon, as promised. She wore the same simple dark dress, and carried nothing. No backpack, no supplies, no Pokemon. She just appeared, a silent shadow falling in step a few paces behind Ash. Her presence had a chilling effect on their usual cheerful banter. Misty kept shooting wary glances over her shoulder. Brock tried to engage her in polite conversation once. So, Sabrina, he'd said with forced cheerfulness. Now that you're, back to your old self, are you thinking about reopening the gym properly? Maybe with some different rules. Sabrina's eyes remained fixed on the back of Ash's head. The gym is irrelevant. My purpose has been updated. Brock wisely decided not to ask what her purpose had been updated to. The first major incident occurred when they reached a rickety rope bridge spanning a wide, fast-moving river. It swayed ominously in the wind, and several planks were missing. Looks like we'll have to find another way across, Brock said, peering down at the churning water. There might be a ferry a few miles downstream. That is inefficient, a quiet voice stated. Before Ash could tell her not to, Sabrina stepped forward. She raised a hand. A faint, purple glow enveloped Ash, Misty, Brock, and Pikachu. The world dissolved into a sickening, nauseating vortex of color and sound. It felt like being pushed through a straw at the speed of light. They rematerialized with a jarring thud not on the other side of the river, but 20 feet up, tangled in the branches of a large oak tree. Brock was dangling upside down by his pant leg, Misty was sprawled across a thick branch with a face full of leaves, and Ash was clutching a branch. For dear life, with Pikachu clinging to his hat. Sabrina was standing perfectly poised on a branch below them, looking up with detached curiosity. My spatial calculations were imprecise. The destination coordinates were approximate. Approximate? Misty shrieked, spitting leaves out of her mouth. You teleported us into a tree. I could have been killed. Your mortality was not a factor in the equation, Sabrina replied, as if discussing the weather. The objective was to cross the river. The objective was achieved. Ash, after untangling himself and helping Brock down, decided a new rule was in order. Okay, new rule for the, pilgrimage, he said, trying to keep his voice even. No teleportation. At all. Unless it's a life or death emergency. We walk. We use the bridges. We take the scenic route. Got it? Sabrina's gaze was unblinking. The scenic route is inefficient. It's part of the protocol, Ash insisted. Compatibility testing. You have to prove you can handle inefficiency. She mulled this over for a moment. Very well. The protocol will be followed. Lunch was another adventure in social anthropology. Brock, ever the provider, set up a small camp and began preparing his signature campfire stew. The smell of herbs and simmering broth soon filled the air. Sabrina sat on a rock, watching the proceedings with an unnerving stillness. When Brock offered her a bowl, she simply stared at it. It's food, Brock said gently. You eat it. For energy. She took the bowl. She didn't use the spoon. She dipped her fingers into the hot stew, then brought them to her mouth, her expression a mask of clinical analysis. The texture is varied. The temperature is elevated. The flavor profile is complex. She looked at Ash. My father had my nutritional requirements delivered intravenously. It was more efficient. Well, this is better, Ash said, taking a large bite from his own bowl. It's part of the journey. You have to eat real food. She copied him, taking a spoonful, using the spoon this time, and eating it. A strange look crossed her face. A flicker of something that wasn't analysis, but pleasure. It is pleasant, she conceded, and proceeded to eat the rest of the stew with a quiet, focused intensity. The afternoon brought the conflict Ash had been dreading. He was training with Pidgeotto, running drills against a wild Raticate they'd encountered. It was a good match, Pidgeotto's aerial speed against the Raticate's ferocity. Pidgeotto, wing attack, let's go. Ash commanded. As Pidgeotto dove, a quiet voice cut through the air. The Raticate will feint left and then use Hyper Fawn. Its rear leg is strained. It cannot sustain a prolonged chase. Ash and the Raticate both froze. Pidgeotto pulled up, circling in confusion. The Raticate, its strategy laid bare, squeaked in alarm and scurried away into the undergrowth. Ash whipped around, a hot surge of anger rising in him. Sabrina was standing there, her expression placid. What was that? Ash demanded, his voice sharp. I provided you with a tactical analysis to ensure a swift victory, she stated simply. It was the most efficient path to success. That's not success. That's cheating. Ash snapped. You don't read your opponent's mind. You read their movements, you anticipate their strategy, you battle them. The fight, the struggle, that's the whole point. Misty and Brock, sensing an impending explosion, took a few steps back. Sabrina looked genuinely bewildered. This was a concept utterly foreign to her. Why would you choose a less efficient method? Why embrace struggle when a solution is readily available? It is illogical. Because that's how you learn. It's how you grow stronger, you and your Pokémon together. Ash stalked over to her, his fists clenched. There's honor in it. There's sportsmanship. Things you clearly know nothing about. The accusation hit her, but not in the way he expected. She didn't get angry. She didn't retaliate. A shadow of the lost little girl passed through her eyes. These concepts, honor, sportsmanship, they were not part of my previous operational parameters. They are, loud. Complicated. Her confusion was so absolute, so genuine, that it doused Ash's anger like a bucket of water on a campfire. He wasn't arguing with a rival. He was trying to explain the color blue to someone who had only ever seen in black and white. He sighed, the frustration draining out of him, replaced by a weary sense of the monumental task ahead. Look, he said, his voice softer. Rule number 3 of the pilgrimage. No using your psychic powers during my battles. No reading minds, no telling me what to do. You just watch. That's it. Can you do that? I am to observe your preference for inefficient, struggle-based methodologies, she clarified, processing the command. Yes, Ash said, pinching the bridge of his nose. Exactly. The protocol is updated, she confirmed with a nod. Later that night, as the fire crackled and cast dancing shadows against the trees, the weight of the day settled on Ash. Brock and Misty were asleep in their sleeping bags, but Ash sat staring into the flames. Sabrina sat on the other side of the fire, as still and silent as the stone she was perched on, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. He had survived. They had survived. But this was unsustainable. Every single aspect of their lives was a potential crisis. He felt less like a trainer on a journey and more like a bomb disposal expert escorting a live warhead. As if sensing his thoughts, she spoke, her voice a soft murmur that barely disturbed the night air. You are distressed. It wasn't a question. Yeah, you could say that, Ash muttered. Your emotional state is highly volatile. It fluctuates between irritation, resignation, and a low-frequency current of protectiveness. It is an inefficient combination. Ash looked up, meeting her gaze across the fire. You're doing it again. I am not reading your mind, she clarified. I do not need to. Your emotions project from you like heat from this fire. It is, loud. But it is not the same as the others. Theirs is noise. Yours is, a signal. It is the signal I followed out of the darkness. The raw honesty of her statement silenced him. She wasn't trying to be poetic. She was just stating a fact. His very presence was a beacon to her, a fixed point in her chaotic new world of feeling. The thought was both terrifying and humbling. Why, he asked, the question escaping him before he could stop it. Why me? Everyone else looked at the doll, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. He knew she meant the cold, tyrannical construct she had built. They spoke to the doll. They feared the doll. They tried to use the doll. Her gaze was piercing. You were the first one who walked past it. You saw the girl crying in the corner. Everyone else saw the power. You saw the pain. She hugged her knees to her chest, a surprisingly human gesture. I do not understand honor or sportsmanship. I do not understand inefficiency. But I understand that. I understand that you saw me when I was invisible. That is why the conclusion is sound. Ash had no answer to that. He just stared into the fire, the weight of her logic, flawless and terrifying, settling over him. 2 days later, the air began to change. A strange, electric tang filled it, and the sky to the east took on a sickly, greenish-yellow hue. Pikachu spent most of his time on Ash's shoulder with his ears twitching, letting out low, anxious rumbles. They passed a group of hikers heading the other way who spoke of strange power surges and a total blackout at the Kanto power plant, a hulking industrial complex nestled in the rocky hills just off their route. The hikers mentioned seeing figures in black uniforms with a large red R on them setting up a perimeter. Team Rocket. Sounds like they're up to no good, Brock said grimly. A power plant is a dangerous place for them to be playing. Whatever they're doing, it's big, Ash said, looking at the ominous glow in the sky. That's not a normal power surge. We should report it to Officer Jenny in the next town, Misty suggested, clearly nervous. This is way out of our league. By the time we do that, they could be gone, along with whatever they came for, Ash countered, his mind already racing. We need to see what's going on. Ash, this isn't some back-alley pigeon-napping operation, Misty argued. The hikers said they looked like professionals. This could be dangerous. All the more reason to stop them, Ash said, his expression hardening. We're not going to charge in blindly. We'll scout it out first. He looked over at Sabrina, who had been listening to the exchange with her usual unnerving placidity. Can you sense anything? She closed her eyes. For a moment, her brow furrowed. There is a concentration of immense energy. It is wild, chaotic, and angry. It feels like a storm trapped in a bottle. And there are other minds, disciplined, cold, focused on a singular objective. They are the ones holding the bottle. A storm in a bottle. Ash thought of the legendary birds. It couldn't be. We're going, he declared, his decision made. The power plant was a concrete behemoth, a maze of pipes, turbines, and humming transformers, now eerily silent. Just as the hikers reported, elite-looking Team Rocket grunts patrolled the perimeter. They moved with a military precision that Jesse, James, and Meowth could only dream of. Getting inside would be impossible for Ash, Brock, and Misty. But they had a secret weapon. Stay close to me, Sabrina whispered, her voice barely audible. And do not think loudly. She raised a hand, and a shimmering field of psychic energy, almost invisible to the naked eye, enveloped them. It didn't make them invisible, but it bent light and sound around them, creating a subtle, do-not-notice, field. They walked right past a patrol, the guards' eyes sliding over them as if they were just shadows or tricks of the light. Inside, the plant was a ghost town. Workers were slumped over consoles or tied up in storage closets, all unconscious. They moved deeper, guided by the growing hum of energy that Sabrina had described. It led them to the main turbine hall, a cavernous chamber filled with colossal machinery. In the center of the hall, the source of the disturbance was terrifyingly clear. Zapdos, the legendary bird of lightning, was trapped inside a crackling cage of crimson energy beams. The great bird, a being of pure electricity and thunder, beat its wings against the cage, letting out furious, crackling squawks. Every time its body touched a beam, the entire plant groaned, and the lights flickered violently. Standing before the cage was a man who radiated an aura of cold, sharp authority. He was tall and lean, with silver hair cut in a severe military style and a thin, cruel smile. He wore a pristine black uniform, far more ornate than the grunts, adorned with a silver lightning bolt insignia beneath the red R. He was flanked by two grunts armed with sophisticated-looking energy rifles. "Report, Executive Surge," the man said into a comm link on his wrist. His voice was calm, clipped, and full of command. A voice crackled back. "Containment field is holding at 87%, sir. The creature's electrical output is higher than projected. We are siphoning the excess energy, but the capacitors are nearing their limit. Reinforce the emitters," Surge ordered. "I will not have this prize slip through my fingers. Giovanni expects results, not excuses." He turned his attention back to the struggling Zapdos, a look of predatory appreciation on his face. Such magnificent power. Wasted on a wild beast. We will put it to proper use. Behind a massive generator, Ash and his friends watched in horror. That's Zapdos, Brock breathed, his voice full of awe and terror. They're trying to capture a legendary Pokémon. We have to stop them, Ash whispered, his mind racing. He looked at Surge, at the elite grunts, at the advanced technology. This was beyond a simple Pokémon battle. How? Misty whispered back. They're armed. And that cage looks like it could fry us in a second. Ash turned to Sabrina. Her eyes were fixed on the trapped legendary, a strange, resonant sympathy in her expression. She knew what it was like to be a storm in a bottle. Sabrina, Ash said in a low voice. The emitters. The machines projecting that cage. Can you disrupt them? She tore her gaze away from Zapdos. Their power source is centralized. But it is shielded. A direct psychic assault would be difficult. And they would detect it instantly. Okay. So a distraction is first. Ash formulated a plan. Brock, you and I will cause a commotion over there, draw the grunt's attention. Misty, I need you to get to that control panel. He pointed to a console near the far wall. It looks like it regulates the main power. If you can cause a surge or a blackout, it might disrupt the cage. Sabrina, he met her eyes. The moment the cage flickers, I need you to hit the central emitter with everything you have. Don't try to be subtle. Just break it. It was a desperate, flimsy plan, but it was the only one they had. They all nodded grimly. On my mark, Ash whispered. Go. Brock and Ash broke from cover. Hey, Team Rocket. Ash yelled. Let that Zapdos go. Surge turned, his expression of mild annoyance quickly hardening into a glare. Intruders. Deal with them. The two grunts raised their rifles, but Ash and Brock were already moving. Onyx, go. Geodude, let's do it. The two rock types materialized, providing immediate cover as the grunts opened fire with beams of concussive energy. While Onyx's massive body absorbed the blasts, Misty sprinted for the control panel, her heart pounding. Surge watched with a detached air. Amateurs. He snapped his fingers. Electabuzz, Magneton. Show them some discipline. His two Pokémon appeared in a flash. They were sleek, powerful, and moved with terrifying speed. Surge's Electabuzz was a monster, its muscles crackling with power. It unleashed a thunder punch that sent Brock's Geodude flying. Surge's Magneton fired a sonic boom that forced Onyx to recoil. Ash's Pikachu leaped into the fray, a blur of yellow, but Magneton's metallic body was resistant to its attacks, and Electabuzz was simply too fast and strong. Meanwhile, Misty reached the panel, her hands flying over the controls. Come on, she muttered, trying to find the master breaker. Surge noticed her. Stop that girl. One of the grunts broke off, leveling his rifle at Misty. But before he could fire, a massive steel pipe from the ceiling wrenched itself free and slammed down in front of him, blocking his path. He stared at it in shock. Surge's eyes narrowed, scanning. The shadows. A psychic. How interesting. The distraction had worked. The grunts were occupied, Surge's Pokémon were engaged with Brock and Ash, and his own attention was divided. Now, Misty. Ash yelled. Misty slammed her hand down on a large, red button. The main lights in the turbine hull died, plunging them into semi-darkness, lit only by the emergency strobes and the crimson glow of the containment field. The energy cage around Zapdos flickered violently for a single, critical second. It was the opening they needed. Sabrina, now. Ash roared. From the shadows, Sabrina's eyes snapped open, glowing with a terrifying purple light. She thrust her hands forward. All of her focused, repressed psychic power, a force that could warp reality itself, coalesced and shot forward not as a wave, but as a pinpoint lance of pure kinetic force. It didn't hit the cage. It hit the central emitter projecting the beams. There was no grand explosion. There was just a sharp crack, and the complex crystal at the heart of the machine shattered into a million pieces. The crimson beams died instantly. Zapdos was free. The legendary bird let out a screech of pure, unadulterated fury. For a moment, it hung in the air, its jagged wings spread wide, its entire body crackling with an impossible amount of electricity. It was a god of thunder, and its temple had been defiled. Contain it. Surge bellowed, his composure finally breaking. Fire everything. It was too late. With a sound like the sky tearing in two, Zapdos unleashed its stored power. A massive, omnidirectional discharge erupted from its body, a dome of white-hot lightning that filled the entire chamber. Ash, Brock, and Misty recalled their Pokémon and dove for cover. The rocket grunts screamed as they were thrown back, their equipment shorting out. Surge's Electabuzz and Magneton were knocked unconscious in an instant. The wave of energy washed over everything, turning metal red-hot and shattering every light bulb and computer screen in the hall. Surge threw up a personal energy shield from a device on his wrist, the technology groaning under the strain. Through the blinding light, he saw Zapdos wheel in the air and blast a hole through the roof of the plant, soaring out into the stormy sky with a triumphant cry. When the light faded, the hall was a wreck. Surge stood amidst the sparking, ruined machinery, his uniform singed. His grunts were groaning on the floor. He looked across the chamber and saw Ash, Misty, and Brock getting to their feet. Sabrina had stepped out of the shadows to join them. Surge's eyes locked onto Ash. His expression wasn't angry. It was one of cold, calculating assessment. He noted Ash's command, the rock-solid Pokémon at his side, the tactical use of the psychic. This wasn't just a bratty kid. This was a threat. Or an asset. You have proven to be more than a minor nuisance, boy, Surge said, his voice dangerously calm. He tapped his calm, executive surge to command. Mission compromised by unforeseen hostiles, including a high-level psychic. Abort and retreat. He gave Ash one last, long look, a look that promised this was far from over. Remember this day. Team Rocket does not forget. With that, he and his recovering grunts vanished down a service corridor, making a tactical and disciplined withdrawal. The four of them stood in the ruined, silent hall, the adrenaline slowly beginning to fade. They had done it. They had faced down an elite Team Rocket unit and freed a legendary Pokémon. I can't believe that worked, Misty said, her voice shaky. We make a pretty good team, Brock added, patting the soot off his vest. Ash turned to Sabrina. She was watching the hole in the roof, her expression distant. The sheer power she had unleashed, even for a moment, had been staggering. But she hadn't gloated. She hadn't even seemed to notice it. You were amazing, Sabrina, Ash said, his voice full of genuine admiration. I couldn't have done it without you. She finally looked at him. The psychic feedback from Zapdos's rage, the thrill of the battle, the new experience of focused, cooperative action, it had all churned together inside her. For the first time, she had used her power not to isolate or dominate, but to help. To be part of something. To win, together. A new feeling bloomed in her chest, alongside the desperate need to keep him close. It was a warmth, a resonant pride. It was the thrill of a shared victory. She gave him a small, almost shy smile. It was the first genuine, positive emotion he had ever seen from her, and it transformed her face, giving him a glimpse of the person hidden beneath the layers of trauma and power. We were a good team, she corrected him softly, testing the word out. The possessive obsession was still there, a powerful undercurrent in the river of her being. But now, another current had joined it. Respect. Partnership. She saw him now not just as the boy who had saved her soul, but as the leader who had shown her what her power could be used for. Ash felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. This was still a terrifying, impossible situation. But for the first time, he felt a flicker of something other than dread. He felt hope. The road ahead was long and treacherous, but maybe, just maybe, he wasn't just babysitting a psychic empress. He was forging a partner. Chapter 3, Whispers from the Static. The victory at the power plant left a strange aftertaste. On the one hand, they had faced down a top-tier Team Rocket executive and freed a legendary Pokémon, a feat that left Brock and Misty buzzing with a mixture of terror and exhilaration for days. On the other hand, it had put them on the radar. Surge's final, cold promise of remembrance was not a threat to be taken lightly. Their journey continued towards Celadon City, but now with a new, unspoken tension. Ash found himself watching their backtrail, half expecting a black uniformed grunt to step out from behind every tree. Sabrina, however, was different. The shared battle had been a catalyst. Her silent, unnerving presence had been replaced by a silent, unnerving curiosity. She watched everything with wide, analytical eyes, as if seeing the world for the first time. She would stop to observe a caterpie spinning its cocoon with the same focused intensity she had used to shatter the containment emitter. She still walked a few paces behind Ash, a self-appointed shadow, but the rigid possessiveness had been tempered by something new. When Ash trained his Pokémon, she would watch, her head tilted, not to judge his inefficiency, but as if trying to understand the strange, passionate dance of battle. Her marriage declarations had ceased, replaced by a steady stream of startlingly direct questions. Why do you command Pidgeotto to use Gust, when a wing attack is demonstrably more powerful? She asked one afternoon as they made camp. Gust pushes them back, throws them off balance, Ash explained, wiping sweat from his brow. It's about controlling the field, not just doing the most damage. Control through indirect force, she murmured, filing the information away. Illogical, yet effective. The protocol requires further observation. It was exhausting, like having a walking, talking, terrifyingly powerful supercomputer analyzing his every move, but it was a marked improvement over being told he was marital property. They arrived at the outskirts of Celadon City on a bright, sunny afternoon. The city known as the City of Rainbow Dreams lived up to its name. It was a sprawling, vibrant metropolis, a stark contrast to Saffron's sterile perfection. The air was filled with the scent of flowers from the massive greenhouses, the sound of the game corners jingles, and the bustle of shoppers crowding the enormous department store. It should have felt like a breath of fresh air. Instead, a familiar wrongness began to prickle at Ash's senses. It wasn't like Saffron. The silence in Saffron had been a presence, a heavy blanket of psychic control. This was an absence. A hollowing out. As they walked deeper into the city, he started to see it. A couple sat on a park bench, holding hands, but their faces were slack, their gazes vacant. A group of children were playing with a ball, but their movements were listless, their laughter thin and lacking joy. There was a strange quietness to their emotions. A muted quality, like a painting that had been left in the sun too long, its colors faded to pale imitations of what they once were. Something's wrong here, Misty said, her voice a low murmur. She shivered, despite the warm sun. It's not as bad as Saffron, but it's creepy. Ash turned to Sabrina. Her eyes were narrowed, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had one hand pressed to her temple. What do you feel? He asked. Static, she said, her voice tight. A psychic interference. It's not a single, focused will like my own. It's diffuse. A field of white noise that dampens everything. It feels like trying to hear a whisper in a room full of humming machinery. It is wrong. A structured, unnatural silence. They checked into the Pokémon Center, a brightly lit place that seemed to be an oasis of normalcy. Nurse Joy was her usual cheerful self, and the trainers inside were boisterous and lively. It seemed the effect, whatever it was, wasn't blanketing the entire city, but was concentrated in pockets. "I'm going to go check out the Celadon gym," Ash announced after his Pokémon were checked in. "Erica uses grass types. I've got Pidgeotto and Charmeleon. This should be a straightforward battle for once." Famous last words, Misty muttered, but she and Brock agreed to meet him there after stocking up on supplies at the department store. Sabrina, of course, followed Ash. As they walked toward the gym, a massive, beautiful greenhouse complex, the feeling of emotional static grew stronger. The people tending the gardens moved with a slow, placid rhythm that was eerily familiar. Their faces held a serene emptiness. "They are like the people in my city," Sabrina observed, her voice barely a whisper. "But the control is less precise. Cruder. It is not a mind being commanded, but a spirit being diluted." Inside the gym, the feeling was at its peak. The air was thick with the scent of flowers and the psychic hum. Erica, the Celadon gym leader, was a picture of serene grace, dressed in an elegant kimono. But her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. There was a placid, dreamy quality to her that felt less like peacefulness and more like detachment. "Welcome, challenger," she said, her voice soft and melodious. "I am Erica. I hope you find your battle here to be a tranquil experience." "I'm Ash from Pallet Town," he said, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. "I'm here for a gym battle." The battle itself was bizarre. Ash sent out Charmeleon, a powerhouse of fire and fury. Erica chose a Weepinbell. Charmeleon, bristling with aggressive energy, was ready to tear the place apart. "Charmeleon, flamethrower." Ash commanded. A jet of orange flame erupted from Charmeleon's mouth. But just as it was about to hit, Weepinbell used sleep powder. A cloud of shimmering spores filled the air. Charmeleon, caught in the cloud, stumbled. Its aggressive posture softened. Its eyes grew heavy. It yawned, a puff of smoke escaping its lips, and then curled up on the grass and promptly fell asleep. "A tranquil battle is one where aggression fades into peace," Erica said with her placid smile. Ash recalled the snoozing Charmeleon, frustrated. This wasn't a battle, it was a sedation. The entire atmosphere of the gym was designed to sap your will to fight. He felt it himself, a lethargy creeping into his limbs, a desire to just sit down in the warm, fragrant air and take a nap. He looked at Sabrina, standing by the entrance. She had her eyes closed, her face a mask of concentration. She was fighting the psychic static, trying to pinpoint its source. Ash knew he couldn't win a conventional battle here. He had to disrupt the environment. "Pidgeotto, I choose you," he yelled, trying to inject some energy into his own voice. As Pidgeotto appeared, Ash had an idea. "Pidgeotto, don't attack. Use Whirlwind. Blow all this pollen away." Pidgeotto beat its wings, creating a powerful gale that tore through the greenhouse. The sleep-inducing spores were blasted away, along with loose leaves and petals. The tranquil atmosphere was shattered. Erica's placid smile faltered for the first time. Such turbulence. "Now, wing attack." Ash pressed his advantage. Pidgeotto Dove, striking Erica's next Pokémon, a Tangela, and knocking it out in a single, decisive blow. The final match against her Vileplume was tougher, but with the air cleared, Ash's aggressive strategy paid off. He won the Rainbow Badge, but the victory felt hollow. Erica handed it to him with the same detached serenity, her competitive spirit seemingly non-existent. As they left the gym, Sabrina spoke, her voice urgent. "The static is strongest here. But this is not the source. It is an amplifier. The source is nearby. Below us." "Below us?" Ash frowned. They met up with a worried Brock and Misty outside. "Ash, you'll never believe this," Misty said, holding up a shopping bag. "We went to the game corner. People are just sitting there, pumping coins into the slots with these blank looks on their faces. It's like they're hypnotized." And the weirdest part? The place is run by Team Rocket. Of course it was. Giovanni's fingers were in every pie. But that's not all, Brock added, his expression grave. We overheard some of the grunts talking. They weren't talking about stealing Pokémon. They were talking about shipments and artifacts. Something about a research outpost hidden underneath the game corner. A research outpost. Psychic static. Strange artifacts. It was all starting to connect. That's the source, Sabrina said with certainty. The psychic interference is emanating from beneath the game corner. Then that's where we're going, Ash declared. Infiltrating the Rocket game corner was surprisingly easy. The grunts inside were just as listless and emotionally muted as the patrons, their minds dulled by the very psychic field they were guarding. It was a lazy, sloppy security system that relied on the apathy of its victims. They found a poster of Giovanni on a back wall that, with a nudge from Sabrina's telekinesis on a hidden switch, slid aside to reveal a hidden staircase leading down. The air grew colder as they descended, and the psychic hum intensified, becoming a low, throbbing drone that made their teeth ache. The corridor opened into a brightly lit, sterile laboratory. It was a jarring contrast to the gaudy casino upstairs. Technicians in white lab coats moved between computer terminals and large glass tubes, their faces just as placid and empty as everyone else's. Their movements were efficient but lacked any spark of life. It's a hive, Brock whispered, horrified. They're like a bunch of drones. Ash's eyes were drawn to the center of the lab. On a raised platform, surrounded by complex machinery, was a large, obsidian table. And floating just above it were the artifacts. They were a collection of strange, angular shapes, like pieces of a broken alphabet, each with a single, unblinking eye in its center. They drifted lazily in a containment field, occasionally bumping into one another with a soft, melodic chime. Unknown. Ash had read about them in a book once. Mysterious, ancient Pokémon said to live in their own dimension. But seeing them here, harnessed by machinery, felt deeply wrong. The static comes from them, Sabrina breathed, her hand going to her head as if in pain. They are not projecting it intentionally. It is a byproduct of their existence. A frequency of thought so alien it cancels out our own. And this machinery, it's amplifying it, focusing it. On a large screen on the far wall, a face appeared. It was a man with sharp, intelligent features, kind eyes, and a calm, reassuring smile. He wore a simple researcher's coat. A nameplate beneath the video feed read, Dr. Silas, Project Lead. The man on the screen began to speak, his voice a soothing, charismatic baritone. It was clearly a recorded message, a mission statement for the project. For centuries, humanity has been plagued by its own nature, Silas began, his voice full of a gentle, paternal sorrow. War, greed, hatred, jealousy, these are not external forces. They are the symptoms of a single, core disease, unchecked emotion. Passion, in its rawest form, is chaos. It is the source of all suffering. He gestured to the floating unknown, which were now projected on the screen behind him. But we have found the key. These beings are not mere Pokémon. They are a language. The source code of reality itself. A hive-mind entity from a dimension of perfect, silent order. A silent god. The camera zoomed in on his face. His kind eyes held a terrifying, messianic zeal. Our work here is the first step. By amplifying their natural frequency, we can create zones of emotional tranquility. We can soothe the chaotic hearts of humanity. We can bring peace. Not the fragile peace of treaties and laws, but a true, fundamental peace, by editing the very source of our conflict. Imagine a world without rage. Without grief. A world of perfect, placid contentment. That is the world we will build. That is the promise of Project Unknown. The video looped. Ash stared at the screen, a cold dread washing over him. This was infinitely more terrifying than Team Rocket's simple greed. Giovanni wanted to rule the world. Silas wanted to lobotomize it. He's insane, Misty whispered, her face pale. He's a monster, Brock corrected. He is an architect, Sabrina said, her voice heavy with a terrible understanding. Like me. He saw the pain of the world and decided to build a dollhouse to contain it. But his dollhouse is for everyone. Suddenly, a klaxon began to blare. Red lights flashed throughout the lab. On the screen, Silas's face was replaced by bold, red text, anomalous talent detected. Sector C, initiating Aegis Protocol. Aegis Protocol? Ash muttered. What's that? Doors at the far end of the lab hissed open, but it wasn't Team Rocket grunts that came pouring through. These were soldiers. They wore sleek, gray and black tactical gear, their faces obscured by full helmets. They carried advanced, non-lethal weaponry and moved with a silent, terrifying efficiency that made Surge's unit look like amateurs. On their shoulders was an insignia Ash had never seen before, a stylized shield with a single, watchful eye in the center. They weren't here for the unknown. They were here for them. All units, target the psychic, a clipped, synthesized voice commanded from their helmet speakers. Priority 1 is containment of the anomalous human talent. Before Ash could even react, one of the soldiers fired. A net of crackling blue energy shot out, heading straight for Sabrina. Ash moved on pure instinct. He shoved Sabrina to the ground, the net flying over her head and harmlessly splashing against a bank of computers. Pikachu, Thunderbolt. Pikachu leaped from his shoulder, unleashing a powerful blast of electricity. It struck one of the soldiers square in the chest. The man's armor sparked, and he staggered back, but he didn't fall. His suit was clearly designed to absorb energy attacks. Hostile Pokémon engaged. Switch to kinetic response, the leader commanded. The soldiers' weapons shifted, and they began firing rounds of hard, compressed air that struck with the force of a sledgehammer. Brock's Onyx materialized, taking the brunt of the assault, its rock-hard body groaning under the impacts. They're not Team Rocket. Misty yelled, ducking behind a console as a volley of air bursts shattered the equipment around her. Who are these guys? I don't know, but they're not here to talk. Ash yelled back. He looked at Sabrina. She was on the ground, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. These soldiers, their cold efficiency, their focus on her, it was a nightmare made real. They weren't here to battle her. They were here to capture her. To put her in a cage. The dollhouse was gone, but the world was already building a new one for her. The leader of the Aegis squad, a tall figure whose helmet had a thin, red visor, pointed directly at Sabrina. The AHT is designated Sabrina. Class A threat. Unregistered. Hostile. Use of full-spectrum dampeners is authorized. Two soldiers broke off, carrying a heavy-looking device with two large prongs. It began to hum with a sickening, high-frequency pitch. Ash felt it instantly. The warmth in his chest, the faint thrum of his own aura, flickered and died, suppressed by the device. Sabrina cried out in pain, clutching her head as the psychic static in the room was amplified 100-fold, targeted directly at her. Her own powers were being smothered. We have to get out of here. Ash shouted over the din, the way we came in. He grabbed Sabrina's arm, pulling her to her feet. She was disoriented, her powers neutralized, the confident Empress replaced by a frightened, overwhelmed young woman. Onyx, smoke screen. Brock commanded. Onyx slammed its tail into the ground, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and debris, obscuring the soldiers' line of sight. Go. Now. Ash yelled. They sprinted for the stairs, dragging the stumbling Sabrina with them. The Aegis commander, Valerius, watched them go, his red visor tracking their movements through the smoke. He didn't give chase immediately. They're heading for the surface, he said into his comm, his voice a cold, synthetic monotone. All surface units, converge on the Celadon game corner. Set up a containment perimeter. No one gets in or out. And I want visual confirmation on the boy. The one who shielded the AHT. He registered on my sensors. Another latent talent. A possible aura user. He is now designated a person of interest. Tag him. Do not let them escape the city. Ash, Misty, Brock, and Sabrina burst out from behind the poster, back into the garish, noisy game corner. But the atmosphere had changed. The listless patrons and grunts were gone. The place was swarming with more Aegis soldiers, setting up barricades, their movements swift and precise. They were trapped. This way. Ash yelled, pulling them toward a service exit at the back of the building. They crashed through the door into a back alley, the sounds of shouts and locking mechanisms echoing from the casino behind them. They ran. They sprinted down the alley, bursting out onto a main street. The city, which had felt so vibrant just hours ago, now felt like a closing trap. They could hear the faint, distant whine of sirens. Aegis vehicles, no doubt. They rounded a corner and skidded to a halt. Blocking the end of the street was a squad of Aegis soldiers, weapons raised. From the other end of the street, more soldiers were advancing, cutting off their retreat. We're cornered. Misty cried, her back pressed against a wall. Ash's mind raced. Sabrina was still reeling from the psychic dampener, her greatest weapon useless. They were outmanned, outgunned, and surrounded. Ash looked up. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows. They were next to the Celadon department store, a monolithic building that stretched up 6 stories. He made a split-second decision. Inside. Now. They ducked into the department store's main entrance just as the Aegis squads opened fire. The glass doors shattered behind them. They found themselves in the store's perfume section, the air thick with 1,000 conflicting scents. Shoppers screamed and fled as the gray-clad soldiers began to flood the entrance. Up. Ash commanded, pointing to the escalators. We need the roof. A desperate chase began. They scrambled up the escalators, the soldiers in hot pursuit. They ran through housewares, dodged flying toasters and blenders knocked over by stray shots. They raced through the toy department, where a kinetic blast sent a shower of plastic blocks flying through the air. Ash felt a surge of his own power returning as they put distance between themselves and the dampening field. It wasn't the overwhelming force of Sabrina's psychic might, but a low, steady hum. It sharpened his senses, slowed his perception of time just enough to see the openings, the paths through the chaos. He felt a blast of compressed air coming and shoved Brock out of the way a second before it would have hit him. They reached the top floor, the rooftop restaurant, and crashed through the doors leading outside. They were on the roof, the wind whipping at them, the whole of Celadon City spread out below. But they were on an island in the sky, with nowhere left to run. The door to the stairwell slammed open, and the Aegis commander, Valerius, stepped onto the roof, flanked by his soldiers. He raised his hand, and his troops held their fire. He retracted his helmet with a hiss, revealing the face of a man in his late 30s, with cold, gray eyes, a square jaw, and an expression of grim determination. He looked less like a soldier and more like a surgeon about to perform a difficult, but necessary, operation. "This is over," Valerius said, his voice no longer synthesized, but still just as cold and commanding. "Sabrina of Saffron City. You are an unregistered Class A anomalous human talent. By the authority of the Global Aegis Mandate, you are to surrender yourself for containment and psychological evaluation." His gaze then shifted to Ash. "And you? You have actively interfered with an Aegis operation and harbored a fugitive talent. Surrender now, and your case will be reviewed with leniency." Ash stepped in front of Sabrina, shielding her. She was still pale, but the defiance was returning to her eyes. "She's not a fugitive," Ash said, his voice ringing with conviction. "She's a person. And we're not surrendering to anyone." Valerius sighed, a sound of genuine disappointment. I was afraid you would say that. I have read the reports from Saffron. I know what happened. You believe you saved her. What you did was unleash an unstable weapon on the world. Our purpose is to prevent the cataclysm that people like her inevitably cause. We are the shield that protects humanity from powers it cannot comprehend. You're not a shield, you're a cage, Ash shot back. You're just as bad as he is. At least Silas thinks he's bringing peace. You're just afraid of anything you can't control. Control is our purpose, Valerius stated flatly. It is our duty. He lowered his hand. Contain them. As the soldiers advanced, Ash looked around frantically. There was only one way off the roof. Down. He glanced over the edge. It was a 6-story drop. He looked at Sabrina. Can you do it? He asked, his voice low. Can you get us out of here? She was still weak, the dampener's effects lingering, but she met his gaze, her jaw set. My telekinesis is unreliable. The field is still active. I don't need you to fly us. I just need you to slow us down. He backed toward the edge of the roof, pulling her with him. Misty and Brock followed, their faces pale with terror but their trust in Ash absolute. You're crazy. Misty gasped. We'll be killed. Trust me. Ash yelled. He looked back at Valerius. The commander had stopped, watching them, a look of disbelief on his face. Ash grabbed Sabrina's hand. He squeezed it, and for a second, he pushed that warmth, that aura, that feeling of I am here, and I will not let you fall, directly into her. It was a spark of his own certainty, a lifeline. She gasped, her eyes widening as she felt the surge. It wasn't power, it was focus. It cleared the fog in her mind. Now! Ash shouted. And with his friends in tow, he jumped off the roof. Chapter 4, The Fugitive and the Anchor. The world became a stomach-lurching collage of wind and falling concrete. For a terrifying half-second, there was only gravity, a relentless pull toward the hard, unforgiving street 6 stories below. Misty screamed, a raw, primal sound swallowed by the rushing air. Brock's face was a mask of grim acceptance, his eyes squeezed shut. Ash held fast to Sabrina's hand, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He poured every ounce of his focus, every scrap of that strange, warm energy in his chest, into their connection. It wasn't a command. It was a plea. A desperate, silent scream of we are here, together. Hold on. Sabrina's eyes, wide with the shock of the fall, suddenly snapped into focus. The lingering psychic static from the Aegis dampeners was a thick, syrupy fog in her mind, but Ash's desperate certainty was a lighthouse beam cutting through it. She felt his trust, his insane, illogical faith in her, and it became an anchor. She extended her free hand. A faint, shimmering purple aura flickered around them, sputtering like a dying flame. It wasn't the overwhelming force she usually commanded. It was a thin, fragile shield of telekinetic energy, fighting against the dampening field that still blanketed the city block. They didn't stop falling. But they slowed. The plummet became a controlled, terrifyingly fast descent. Instead of pancaking onto the pavement, they hit the ground hard, a bone-jarring impact that sent them sprawling across the asphalt of a deserted side street. Ash's shoulder screamed in protest as he rolled, taking the brunt of the impact to shield Pikachu. Misty landed in a heap, gasping for breath. Brock groaned, pushing himself onto his hands and knees. Sabrina collapsed, her face pale and beaded with sweat. The effort, so simple for her under normal circumstances, had drained her completely. On the roof above, Commander Valerius stared down, his cold composure momentarily fractured by disbelief. He watched them pick themselves up, battered but alive, and disappear into the labyrinth of Celadon's back alleys. All units. Ground level, he commanded, his voice tight with frustration. They're on foot. Seal the block. I want them found. He turned from the edge, his gaze sweeping over his soldiers. The mission had just escalated from a simple containment to the pursuit of fugitives with an unknown but clearly powerful latent talent on their side. This was no longer just about Sabrina. It was about the boy. Down in the urban canyons, the chase was a blur of survival. Sirens wailed in the distance, their sounds echoing and distorting between the tall buildings, making it impossible to pinpoint their direction. Every shadow seemed to hold an Aegis soldier. Every intersection felt like a potential ambush. Ash led the way, his mind sharp and clear, running on pure adrenaline. His aura, no longer suppressed, was a low hum beneath his skin, heightening his senses. He didn't just see the path ahead, he felt it. A dead-end alley broadcast a feeling of confinement. A clear route felt like an open channel. This way, he'd yell, ducking down a narrow passageway between a restaurant and a laundromat, the smell of fried noodles and bleach filling the air. Brock, with his longer legs, took on the role of rear guard, helping Misty and the still weak Sabrina over obstacles. Misty, her fear now forged into a sharp-edged anger, kept a lookout, her eyes scanning rooftops and doorways. There. Two of them, on the corner. They were hunted. The Aegis soldiers were relentless, disciplined, and everywhere. They weren't like Team Rocket, who could be outsmarted or intimidated. They were a force of nature, a tide of gray and black that flowed through the city, seeking to surround and subdue them. They found temporary refuge in the dark, cavernous space beneath the elevated bike path known as Cycling Road. Huddled behind a massive concrete pylon, they finally had a moment to catch their breath. The sounds of the city were muted here, replaced by the rhythmic whirring of bicycles passing overhead. "My everything hurts," Misty groaned, leaning her head back against the cold concrete. "Are you okay, Sabrina?" Sabrina was sitting with her back against the pylon, her knees drawn up to her chest. She was shivering, though the night was mild. The confident, almost arrogant poise she had started to develop was gone, stripped away by the dampeners and the fall. She looked small and fragile, lost. Silence, she whispered, her voice trembling. When they turned on that machine, it was like being back in the void. Alone. I couldn't feel anything. Ash understood. The Aegis division hadn't just neutralized her powers, they had attacked her very soul, using the one thing she feared most as a weapon against her. "We need to get out of the city," Brock said, his voice low and practical. He was examining a map on his poke gear, the small screen casting a faint glow on his face. "They'll have all the main roads blocked. If we follow the river west, out from under Cycling Road, it should take us into the forests. We'll have more cover there." "Good plan," Ash agreed. He looked at Sabrina. "Can you walk?" She nodded, but didn't look at him. She was staring at her own hands as if they were foreign objects. The tools of her power, the very things that had defined her existence, had failed her. She had been helpless, a liability. The thought was a shard of ice in her gut. They set out again, moving through the shadows along the riverbank. The journey was a tense, grueling trek. They had to wade through shallow, muddy water to avoid patrols on the bridges above. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, sent a jolt of fear through them. Finally, as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, they left the last of Celadon's urban sprawl behind. The concrete and steel gave way to the ancient, gnarled trees of the western forest. They were exhausted, filthy, and hungry, but they were free of the city-sized trap. They found a small, hidden grove, a natural depression sheltered by thick bushes and old-growth oaks, and collapsed. Brock, ever prepared, immediately began to take stock of their meager supplies. Misty simply lay on a patch of moss, staring up at the canopy. Ash watched Sabrina. She had retreated back into herself, sitting apart from the others, wrapped in a silence that was disturbingly familiar. It was the silence of Saffron City, the silence of the dollhouse. A wall she was rebuilding, brick by painful brick. He knew he couldn't let that happen. He had promised her she wouldn't be alone, and right now, she was isolating herself more effectively than any prison could. That night, after Brock and Misty had finally succumbed to exhaustion and fallen into a deep sleep, Ash sat by the small, smokeless fire Brock had managed to build. He was cleaning his pokeballs, the familiar ritual a small comfort in the chaos. Sabrina was still awake, a sentinel of misery on the other side of the fire. She hadn't eaten, hadn't spoken more than 2 words since they'd escaped the city. Ash put down the polishing cloth. He stood up, walked around the fire, and sat down on the log next to her. She didn't acknowledge him, her gaze fixed on the darkness between the trees. "We need to talk," he said quietly. She remained silent. "Sabrina," he said, his voice a little firmer. "Look at me." Slowly, reluctantly, she turned her head. In the flickering firelight, he could see the hollows under her eyes. The vibrant life he had seen return to her was gone, replaced by a dull, aching emptiness. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice flat. "I want to know what's wrong," he said. "And don't say, nothing. You've been like this since we left Celadon." A bitter, humorless smile touched her lips. "What's wrong?" "We are being hunted by a private army that can nullify my powers at will. Your lives are in danger because of me. We are fugitives with no food, no shelter, and no allies. And the first time you truly needed me, the one time my power could have saved us from a fatal fall, I nearly failed. My unreliable telekinesis almost got us all killed. The data is unequivocal. What's wrong is me." The self-loathing in her voice was a physical thing. He could feel it, a cold, sharp poison. "You didn't fail," Ash countered. "You saved us. It doesn't matter if it was hard. It doesn't matter if it wasn't perfect. You did it. That's what counts." It was a statistical anomaly, she snapped, her voice cracking with a sudden, raw frustration. "A confluence of luck and your interference. I was compromised. I was weak. I was a liability. The Empress of Saffron City, reduced to a trembling child who couldn't even perform a simple levitation spell. I don't care about the Empress of Saffron City." Ash shot back, his own frustration boiling over. He wasn't angry at her, but at the prison of perfection she was trying to lock herself back into. "I never did. I didn't go into your mind to save an empress. I went in to help a little girl who was crying in the dark." The word struck her like a physical blow. She flinched, her eyes widening. Ash's voice softened, but the intensity remained. "This whole time, you've been talking about me being your anchor. You've been following me, watching me, analyzing me like I'm some cure. Some protocol to follow. But an anchor is useless if the ship wants to sink. I can't save you from yourself, Sabrina. I can't be the only thing holding you together. That's not a partnership. It's a prison for both of us." He leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers, demanding she see him, that she hear him. "So I'm done being your savior. I'm done being your anchor. I need to know who you are. Not your powers. Not the Empress. Not the girl in the dollhouse. You. The person sitting next to me right now. Who is she? What does she want? Because if you don't even know, then this whole thing, us, it's pointless." The silence that followed was heavy, profound. The fire crackled, spitting sparks into the darkness. A tear traced a path down Sabrina's cheek, shimmering in the firelight. Then another. She wasn't sobbing like she had in the gym. This was a quiet, desolate weeping. "I don't know," she whispered, the words choked with a pain so deep it seemed to come from the very core of her being. "I don't know who I am." Her composure finally shattered. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "For as long as I can remember, I was just the power. A tool for my father. A prodigy. A weapon. The world was so loud, so full of painful thoughts and sharp emotions. I couldn't stand it. So I built the walls. I created the silence. I became the doll. It was safe. It was quiet. She looked up at him, her eyes pleading, raw with a vulnerability he had only glimpsed in the void. When you broke the doll, it was terrifying. Everything came flooding back. All the noise. All the feeling. But you were there. Your thoughts, they weren't like the others. They were clear. Simple. She's scared. She's alone. I have to help. Her voice dropped to a near inaudible whisper. The marriage, the protocol, that was the only way I knew how to process it. A logical framework for an illogical feeling. If you were with me, bound to me, then the darkness couldn't come back. The silence couldn't take me again. It wasn't about love. It was about survival. I was so afraid that if you left, I would shatter. That the doll would come back, and this time, there would be no little girl left to save. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and painful and breathtakingly honest. The obsession wasn't born of love or even infatuation. It was a desperate, primitive survival instinct. She had latched onto him like a drowning person clinging to a piece of driftwood. Ash's anger, his frustration, all of it melted away, replaced by a wave of profound, aching empathy. He saw it all now. The whole, tragic picture. He hadn't just saved her. He had become her entire world, and the weight of that responsibility was crushing them both. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just sat with her in the quiet darkness, letting her words settle, letting her feel the terrifying freedom of her own confession. Finally, he spoke, his voice gentle but firm. Okay. She looked up, confused. Okay. Yeah. Okay, he repeated. You don't know who you are. That's fine. Most people don't, not really. They spend their whole lives trying to figure it out. He offered her a small, genuine smile. So, we'll just have to figure it out together. He reached out, not with his aura, but with his hand, and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. His touch was warm, real. You're not just your power, Sabrina. And you're not just the scared little girl. You're the person who faced down a Team Rocket executive. You're the person who ate Brock stew even though it was weird. You're the person who jumped off a 6-story building with me because I asked you to. You're already in there. You just have to be brave enough to look. He stood up and offered her his hand. I'm not your anchor. And I'm not your savior. I'm your friend. And I promise. I'm not going to abandon you. But you have to promise me you'll stop trying to abandon yourself. Sabrina stared at his outstretched hand. It was the same hand from the void, the same offer. But this time, it wasn't about rescue. It was about partnership. About a shared journey into the unknown. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. The fear that she was broken beyond repair. But looking at Ash's face, at the unwavering belief in his eyes, a belief he had in her that she didn't have in herself, a different feeling sparked to life. A fragile, tentative flicker of hope. Slowly, she put her hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and reassuring. He pulled her to her feet. Get some sleep, he said softly, letting go of her hand. We've got a long way to go. He walked back to his own sleeping bag, leaving her standing by the fire. The obsession hadn't vanished. The fear hadn't disappeared. But its foundation had shifted. The desperate, possessive need to own her savior was beginning to transform into a fragile, terrifying, and profoundly real trust in her friend. For the first time, the idea of a future without a protocol, a future she would have to build for herself, didn't seem like an extinction-level event. It seemed like a beginning. The next few days were a blur of wilderness survival. Brock's skills, once a simple convenience, became their lifeline. He taught them which plants were edible, how to find clean water, and how to read animal tracks to avoid dangerous Pokémon. They were fugitives, but under the vast, open sky, far from the psychic static of cities and the cold steel of Aegis armor, something began to heal. Sabrina changed. The wall didn't come back down. She was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. A quiet of observation, not of isolation. She helped Brock gather berries, her telekinesis used for the simple, practical task of pulling down branches that were out of reach. She listened as Misty passionately explained the nuances of water-type Pokémon. She watched Ash train with a new understanding, seeing not inefficiency, but a bond, a conversation between him and his Pokémon that was spoken in the language of battle. One evening, Ash was sparring with Charmeleon. The fire type was in a foul mood, his power growing faster than his discipline. He ignored Ash's command for a simple ember and instead unleashed a full-power flamethrower that scorched a line through the forest floor, narrowly missing Ash. "Charmeleon, stop it!" Ash yelled, frustrated. "You have to listen to me." Charmeleon just snorted a plume of smoke, turning his back on Ash with reptilian arrogance. Sabrina, who had been watching from a distance, walked over. "He is not defying you," she said, her voice calm and analytical. "He is afraid." Ash stared at her. "Afraid? He's a Charmeleon. He's afraid of nothing." "Incorrect," she said, her gaze fixed on the sulking Pokémon. "His internal state is a conflict. The power inside him is growing, like a fire he can no longer control. It burns him. He feels your commands not as guidance, but as a cage. He fears the power, and he fears the cage. So he lashes out." She had closed her eyes, and Ash knew she was gently probing Charmeleon's mind, not reading it, but sensing the shape of its emotions, just as she had learned to read his. "So what do I do?" Ash asked, his own frustration giving way to concern for his Pokémon. "You are trying to command the fire," Sabrina said. "You need to become the hearth. Give it a place to burn safely. Show him you are not a cage, but a partner in his strength." She opened her eyes and looked at Ash. "Show him that you are not afraid of his power. Then he will not be either." It was the most insightful piece of advice he had ever received. He approached Charmeleon not with commands, but with a quiet confidence. He spent the rest of the evening not fighting him, but working with him, letting him unleash his flames at designated targets, praising his strength, guiding his power instead of trying to cap it. Slowly, the arrogant, fearful Pokémon began to listen, to trust. Ash looked over at Sabrina, who was watching with a small, knowing smile. She had seen the heart of the problem, the pain beneath the anger. She had done for him what he had done for her. The moment of peace was shattered a day later. They had made it to the edge of the forest, which opened up into the plains leading toward Fuchsia City. In the distance, they saw a plume of smoke. As they drew closer, they saw a small farming settlement, a collection of barns and houses, and it was in chaos. People were running, screaming. Several barns were on fire. And stomping through the fields, causing destruction, was a rampaging Rhydon. It wasn't wild. It had the look of a trained Pokémon, but its eyes were glazed over, and it was moving with a mindless, destructive fury. And trying to stop it were two familiar, comically inept figures. "Prepare for trouble, you rampaging ruffian," a woman's voice shrieked. "And make it double, for we're the ones to stop your rampagian," a man's voice added. Jesse and James of Team Rocket were standing in front of the Rhydon, striking a dramatic pose. Their Arbok and Weezing were trying pathetically to halt the behemoth's advance, but their attacks were having no effect. "This is our chance to prove to the boss we're more than just a bunch of failures," Jesse declared. "We'll be heroes." The Rhydon, unimpressed by their motto, swiped its massive tail, sending Arbok and Weezing flying. It then turned its attention on the farmers who were trying to evacuate their milk tank from a burning barn. We have to help them, Misty said. Ash was already moving. Pikachu, let's go. But as he ran, Sabrina grabbed his arm. Wait, she said, her eyes narrowed. The Rhydon. It's mind, it's like the people in Celadon. It's full of static. It's being controlled. Just then, a figure stepped out from behind the burning barn. It was a man in a Team Rocket uniform, but it wasn't one of Surge's elite. It was a standard grunt, and he was holding a strange device, a helmet with a single, glowing red eye, which was pointed at the Rhydon. And on his chest, Ash saw it. A small, barely noticeable pin. An unknown-shaped symbol. It was one of Silas's followers, using a smaller, weaponized version of the Celadon Lab's technology. He was field-testing his peace-bringing device by inducing mindless rage. The pieces clicked into place for Ash. Silas wasn't just a researcher. He had an organization, a cult, growing within the ranks of others. He was a cancer. The Aegis division was hunting them. Silas's agents were spreading chaos. And Team Rocket was caught in the middle. The world was far more complicated and dangerous than he had ever imagined. He looked at the rampaging Rhydon, the terrified farmers, and the two hapless villains trying to be heroes. He looked at Sabrina, her face set with a new, clear-eyed determination. They were fugitives, adrift in a world of spiraling conflict. But right now, none of that mattered. People were in danger. Okay, Ash said, a new resolve hardening his voice. New plan. He wasn't just a kid running for his life anymore. He was a fulcrum in a war he was only just beginning to understand. And he was done just reacting. It was time to push back. Chapter 5, A Deal with the Devil. The Rhydon roared, a sound of pure, manufactured rage, and charged toward the burning barn where a farmer was frantically trying to unlatch a gate, his terrified Miltank huddled behind it. Jesse and James, having recovered their Pokémon, made another valiant, and utterly foolish, stand. Weezing, sludge attack. Blind it. James commanded. A glob of purple goo shot out, splattering harmlessly against Rhydon's rocky hide. The beast didn't even slow down. It lowered its drill horn, ready to pulverize the barn, the farmer, and everything in its path. We have to stop it. Misty cried, her hand already on Starmie's Pokeball. Attacking the Rhydon is inefficient, Sabrina stated, her eyes narrowed not on the rampaging Pokémon, but on the rocket grunt half hidden by the smoke. The controlling agent is the primary target. Neutralize the source, and the weapon is disarmed. Ash heard her, the cold, tactical logic a perfect counterpoint to his own boiling protective instinct. She was right. This wasn't a wild Pokémon to be subdued, it was a puppet. Brock, Misty, help the farmers. Get those Miltank clear. Ash ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos with newfound authority. Sabrina and I will handle the welcoming committee. Brock and Misty didn't hesitate, sprinting toward the farmhands and their panicked livestock. Ash met Sabrina's gaze, a silent question passing between them. Can you do this? She gave a firm, single nod. The fear and uncertainty that had plagued her in the forest were gone, burned away by the clarity of a direct threat. This was a problem she understood, a mind being controlled, a will being subverted. This was her domain. The grunt, focused on his destructive test, didn't see them coming. They flanked him, using the smoke and chaos as cover. Ash moved with a predatory grace, his senses alive, the aura in him a low, steady hum of awareness. Sabrina glided beside him, a silent shadow, her psychic senses mapped out to the battlefield like a three-dimensional radar. Its thoughts are a loop, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackle of flames. A single, repeated command, destroy. There is no room for anything else. The device is crude, but effective. They were 30 feet away when the grunt finally sensed them. He spun around, his eyes widening in surprise as he saw Ash and Sabrina closing in. He fumbled for a pokeball on his belt. He was too slow. Now, Ash said. Sabrina's eyes flashed with purple light. She didn't throw a pipe or lift a rock. She reached out with her mind, not with brute force, but with the precision of a surgeon. The grunt froze, his hand hovering over his belt. The mind control helmet he was holding clattered to the ground as his fingers went slack. He stood perfectly still, his face a mask of confusion, his own will momentarily disconnected from his body. Simultaneously, the ride-on skidded to a halt just feet from the barn door. The glazed, furious look in its eyes vanished, replaced by bewilderment. It looked at the burning barn, the screaming people, its own horn poised for destruction, as if waking from a nightmare. With a confused grunt, it turned and lumbered away, wanting no part of the chaos it had caused. It was over in seconds. Quiet. Efficient. Devastatingly effective. Jesse and James, who had been bracing for impact, blinked in astonishment. Did we do that? James stammered. Of course we did, you dunce. Jesse declared, striking a triumphant pose. Our sheer force of will intimidated the beast into submission. Another victory for Team Rocket. Ash ignored them. He walked over to the paralyzed grunt while Sabrina picked up the helmet, examining it with a clinical, detached curiosity. The grunt's eyes darted back and forth, full of fear. He was trapped inside his own body. Who are you? Ash demanded, his voice low and cold. Who is Silas? The grunt's mouth worked, but no sound came out. Sabrina's control was absolute. He is a believer, Sabrina said, not looking up from the device. One of the enlightened. He thinks this, she tapped the helmet, is a tool of peace. He was inducing a rage state in the ride-on to demonstrate how easily emotion leads to destruction, creating the justification for his own cure. Let me go, the grunt finally choked out, Sabrina having eased her mental grip just enough for him to speak. You can't stop the coming of the silent God. The architect will bring order to this chaotic, painful world. Ash's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a follower. This was a zealot. Silas wasn't just building an army, he was starting a religion. Before Ash could press him for more information, a new sound cut through the air, the high-pitched whine of advanced engines. From over the horizon, two sleek, black aerial drones, emblazoned with the familiar ion shield insignia of the Aegis Division, swooped down toward the farm. They found us, Ash swore, grabbing Sabrina's arm. We have to go. What about him? Sabrina asked, nodding toward the grunt. Ash hesitated. Leaving him here meant Aegis would capture him. They would learn about Silas, about the unknown. It could be a good thing. But it would also put a massive target on Silas's back from a new direction, and Ash had no idea how that would play out. And what would Aegis do with the mind control tech? Study it? Replicate it? His hesitation cost them. One of the drones fired a projectile. It wasn't an energy net or a kinetic blast. It was a small, dart-like object that embedded itself in the ground near them. It immediately began emitting the same high-frequency, psychic dampening pulse as the device in Celadon. Sabrina cried out, stumbling back, the helmet falling from her grasp. The psychic pressure slammed back into her, the mental fog rolling in. The grunt, freed from her control, scrambled to his feet. He gave them a look of pure, fanatical hatred before sprinting off into the fields. Ash! Brock yelled, running toward them. They're coming. In the distance, Aegis vehicles were cresting the hill, a convoy of gray armor and grim purpose. They were caught. Again. In the open, with Sabrina's powers neutralized and their backs to a burning farm. Then, the world turned upside down. A huge shadow fell over them. It wasn't a cloud. Ash looked up and his jaw dropped. A massive, black helicopter, sleek and angular like a predator, descended from the sky. It bore no official markings, but the bold, red R painted on its side was unmistakable. The side door slid open, and a rope ladder was thrown down. A familiar, smug voice echoed from a loudspeaker. "Well, well, well. Looks like the twerps are in a spot of trouble." It was Meowth. Jesse and James were gaping at the helicopter. "Is that, for us?" James asked, his eyes wide. "The boss must have seen our heroic deed and sent a personal escort." Jesse squealed with delight. A figure appeared in the doorway of the chopper. It wasn't Jesse and James's usual contact. This was a man in a crisp, dark suit, his face severe, his posture rigid. It was Executive Surge's second-in-command, a man Ash recognized from the power plant. "The boss wants a word," the man called down, his voice flat and businesslike. His eyes weren't on Jesse and James. They were locked on Ash. "With you. He suggests you accept his invitation. Your other options appear to be limited." He gestured with his head toward the rapidly approaching Aegis convoy. Ash was trapped between two devils. On one side, Commander Valerius and the Aegis division, who wanted to lock Sabrina up and dissect his own abilities. On the other, Team Rocket, led by the most powerful and ruthless man in Kanto, who saw them as assets to be exploited. Valerius offered a cage he called protection. Giovanni offered, what? A gilded cage? A partnership? He looked at Sabrina, pale and struggling against the dampening field. He looked at Brock and Misty, their faces grim, ready to fight a hopeless battle. This wasn't a choice between good and bad. It was a choice between two different kinds of doom. But one of them was offering a way out. At least for now. It was a deal with the devil. But when hell is at your heels, sometimes the devil is the only one who can offer you a ride. "We're coming." Ash yelled up, making the split-second decision. He grabbed the dampener dart from the ground, crushing it in his fist. The psychic pressure lessened instantly. He helped the still dizzy Sabrina to her feet. "Ash, you can't be serious." Misty protested, horrified. "That's Team Rocket. They're the only ones with a helicopter, Misty." Ash shot back. "We'll deal with the consequences later. Right now, we live to fight another day." They scrambled up the rope ladder, Brock pushing a protesting Misty up ahead of him while Ash helped Sabrina. Jesse, James, and Meowth, seizing their chance for a ride with a high-level executive, clambered up after them. The moment they were all inside, the chopper's engines roared, and it ascended rapidly, leaving the farm, the confused farmers, and the approaching Aegis convoy far below. Ash watched as Commander Valerius stepped out of his vehicle, his helmet retracted, and stared up at the retreating helicopter with an expression of pure, cold fury. Ash had not only evaded him again, but had thrown his lot in with a known criminal organization. From a fugitive, he had escalated to a collaborator. The inside of the helicopter was stark and military-grade. The executive ignored them all, speaking quietly into a calm link. Jesse and James were practically vibrating with excitement, convinced they were about to get a promotion. Ash, Brock, Misty, and Sabrina sat in a tense cluster, the reality of their situation sinking in. They had just willingly boarded a Team Rocket gunship. The flight was long and silent. They flew west, far past Fuchsia, toward the mountains that formed the spine of the Kanto region. Finally, the helicopter began to descend, not toward a secret base carved into a mountain, but toward a city. Viridian City. The chopper landed on the roof of the city's most imposing structure, the Viridian City Gym. The place looked less like a gym and more like a fortress. Armed guards in the classic black uniforms stood patrol on the roof. The moment they stepped out, the executive dismissed Jesse and James with a curt wave. "The boss has no time for you. Report to your handler for reassignment." Jesse and James's faces fell, their dreams of glory shattering. Dejected, they were led away by a guard. The executive then turned to Ash's group. "This way. He is waiting." They were escorted not into a Pokemon arena, but down a private elevator that descended deep into the earth. The doors opened into a room that was breathtaking in its opulence. The floor was polished marble, the walls were lined with ancient tapestries and display cases holding priceless artifacts. In the center of the room, behind a massive, obsidian desk, a man sat in a high-backed leather chair, his back to them, stroking a Persian that lay purring in his lap. Ash knew instantly who it was. The sheer weight of his presence filled the room. It wasn't a psychic power like Sabrina's or an energetic one like his own. It was an aura of pure, undiluted authority. The air itself seemed to bend to his will. "Leave us," the man said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that commanded instant obedience. The executive and the guards bowed and departed, the heavy doors closing behind them with a decisive thud. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft purring of the Persian. Then, the chair swiveled around. Giovanni was even more imposing in person than in his pictures. He was a man in his prime, with a powerful build, sharp, intelligent eyes, and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. He wore an immaculate, tailored suit, the orange fabric a bold statement of confidence. He radiated a charisma that was as potent as it was dangerous. His eyes swept over them, assessing each one in turn. He lingered on a nervous Misty, a stoic Brock, and then a wary, defiant Sabrina. Finally, his gaze settled on Ash. He smiled, a thin, cold expression that held no warmth but a great deal of respect. "Ash Ketchum," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "We finally meet. I must say, you have exceeded all of my expectations. You have dismantled my Saffron operation, disrupted my Celadon game corner, and personally cost me the capture of a legendary Pokemon. My top executive, Surge, a man who has conquered armies, described you as a tactical savant with an uncanny ability to inspire loyalty. High praise indeed." Ash's hand instinctively went to Pikachu, who bristled on his shoulder, cheeks sparking. "Relax," Giovanni said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "If I wanted you captured, you would be in a cell. I did not bring you here as a prisoner. I brought you here as a potential business partner. We'll never work for you," Ash spat, his voice full of defiance. Giovanni's smile widened. "So quick to refuse. You haven't even heard the offer. You are currently being hunted by a well-funded, technologically superior Black Ops organization. You have also made an enemy of a messianic lunatic with access to reality-warping technology. You are, to put it mildly, out of your depth." He rose from his chair and walked around the desk, his movements fluid and confident. The Persian leaped from his lap and padded silently beside him. "I, on the other hand, am not. The Aegis Division and I have an understanding. We stay out of each other's way, for the most part. They see my organization as a predictable problem, a cancer they can manage." Silas, however, Giovanni's expression darkened. "He is an unpredictable one. His silent god threatens to disrupt the very fabric of the world I intend to control. He is not just a nuisance, he is a competitor. And I do not tolerate competition." He stopped in front of them, his presence dominating the room. "Here is my offer," he said, his eyes locking onto Ash. "Join me. Pledge your loyalty to Team Rocket. In return, you will have my full protection. The Aegis Division will be called off. My resources will become your resources. My intelligence network will hunt Silas for you. You will have sanctuary, funding, and the backing of the most powerful private army in the world." He then turned his gaze to Sabrina, his eyes holding a flicker of genuine fascination. "And you, my dear. The Psychic Empress. Under my tutelage, your power could shape nations. I would not cage you. I would give you a world to rule." It was the ultimate temptation. An end to running. An end to hiding. The power to fight back against their enemies on an even footing. All they had to do was sell their souls. Misty looked horrified. Brock was unreadable, his expression a stone mask. Ash could feel the conflict raging within himself. The offer was logical. It was, from a purely strategic standpoint, their best and only move. He could feel the seductive pull of it, the promise of safety for his friends, the chance to finally stop looking over his shoulder. He saw Valerius's cold, unforgiving face. He saw the Aegis soldiers, the psychic dampeners. He saw the blank, empty eyes of the people in Celadon City. Giovanni was offering him a sword to fight those monsters. But the sword was poisoned. Sabrina stepped forward. She looked Giovanni directly in the eye, her own power, now fully restored, rising to meet his aura of command. The air in the room grew thick, a silent battle of wills between the kingpin of crime and the empress of psychics. "You offer me a world to rule," she said, her voice clear and cold. "I have already had one. I found it to be lonely." She turned her head slightly, her gaze softening as it fell upon Ash. "I have since discovered that partnership is a more efficient model than solitary rule." Giovanni's eyes narrowed, a flicker of surprise in his expression. He had expected to deal with a broken girl or a power-hungry tyrant. He hadn't expected this unified front. He had underestimated the depth of her loyalty to the boy. He turned his full attention back to Ash, the charismatic mask slipping just enough to reveal the ruthless predator beneath. A noble sentiment. But loyalty doesn't stop kinetic strike munitions. Friendship doesn't hack encrypted databanks. What will your partnership do when Valerius's hunters corner you in a cave with nowhere left to run? What will your friendship do when Silas decides to edit your entire town out of existence? I am offering you the only real weapon you have a chance of wielding, power. True power. He let the offer hang in the air, a tangible thing. Sanctuary. Revenge. Power. Everything they needed. All for the low price of their freedom. Ash looked at his friends. He saw the fear in Misty's eyes, but also the trust. He saw the worry on Brock's face, but also the unwavering support. He looked at Sabrina, who stood beside him, not as a follower or a bodyguard, but as an equal, ready to face whatever came next, as long as they faced it together. He remembered her words by the fire. "I'm not your anchor. I'm your friend." He remembered the feeling of her hand in his as they jumped off that roof. Giovanni's offer was a cage, no matter how gilded. It was a different kind of dollhouse, one where they would be the prized possessions, the ultimate weapons in his arsenal. They would be safe. And they would be slaves. Ash met the crime lord's gaze, his own eyes clear and hard as diamonds. The warmth of his aura flared, not as a weapon, but as a statement of intent, a quiet declaration of his own unbreakable will. "We appreciate the offer," Ash said, his voice ringing with a finality that shocked even himself. "But we'll find our own way." Giovanni's smile vanished completely. The temperature in the room dropped. The charismatic businessman was gone, replaced by the ruthless crime lord he truly was. "A disappointing, and foolish, decision," Giovanni said, his voice turning to ice. He raised a hand and pressed a silent alarm on his desk. "You have made an enemy of the Aegis division. You have made an enemy of Silas's cult. And now, you have made an enemy of me. There is nowhere left in this world for you to run." The heavy doors to the office burst open. Dozens of Team Rocket grunts, armed and ready, flooded the room, surrounding them. Giovanni turned his back on them, returning to his desk. "Show them the consequences of refusing my generosity." He had offered them a deal. They had refused. Now, they would see what happened to those who told the devil, no. Chapter 6, the architect of silence. The opulence of Giovanni's office vanished, replaced by a claustrophobic ring of black uniforms and grim faces. The Team Rocket grunts that flooded the room were not the bumbling fools of roadside encounters. These were the men who guarded Giovanni's throne, his personal guard. They moved with a chilling synchronicity, their Pokémon, powerful Macamp, intimidating Rhyhorn, and venomous Golbat, materializing alongside them, forming a second, more dangerous wall. "I believe," Giovanni said without turning around, his voice a silken threat, "that a lesson in practical realities is in order. Do try not to damage the tapestries. This wasn't a battle to be won. It was a punishment to be endured." Ash didn't waste time with words. He reacted. Pikachu, Thunderbolt, wide dispersal. Brock. Onyx, block the door. Misty, Starmie, smoke screen. Sabrina, now. His commands were a rapid-fire burst, a plan formulated and executed in the space of a single heartbeat. Pikachu leaped into the air, unleashing not a focused bolt, but a wide, crackling web of electricity that arced between the grunts, causing them to flinch and momentarily break formation. Brock's Onyx erupted from its pokeball, its massive stone body slamming against the heavy doors, sealing them inside Giovanni's sanctum. Misty's Starmie appeared in a flash of light, its core gem glowing before it sprayed a thick, disorienting mist from the ceiling, a mixture of water and psychic confusion that fogged the room. And Sabrina. Sabrina did not attack. As the grunts and their Pokémon reeled in confusion, their vision obscured, their senses assaulted, she closed her eyes and reached out with her mind. She didn't target the men or their Pokémon. She targeted the room itself. With a focused grunt of effort, the massive, obsidian desk Giovanni sat behind lifted from the floor. It hovered for a second before she hurled it across the room, not at the grunts, but at the far wall. It shattered against the marble with a deafening crash. The attack was a feint. While every eye was drawn to the spectacular display of destruction, Sabrina's real target was the floor beneath their feet. The polished marble cracked. Then it buckled. With a groan of tortured stone, a huge section of the floor tore upward, creating a ramp that led to the hole in the wall. "Go," she yelled, her voice cutting through the chaos. They scrambled up the makeshift ramp, Ash practically throwing Misty ahead of him. They burst through the shattered wall into a dark, dusty service corridor. Alarms blared throughout the complex. Giovanni watched them go, his expression unreadable. He hadn't moved from his spot, even as his desk flew past him. His Persian hissed, but he simply laid a calming hand on its head. He had made his point. They could run, but the world was his board, and they were now just rogue pieces. He had resources they couldn't fathom. He had patience. He would let them be battered by the other storms, and when they were broken and desperate, he would be waiting. The escape from the Viridian Gym was a frantic, desperate flight. They were deep underground, in the heart of the enemy's fortress. Every corridor seemed to bring more grunts, more battles. It was a running fight, a gauntlet of fire blasts and hyper beams. Ash's Charmeleon, finally in its element, roared through the hallways like a living inferno, its power now guided by a newfound partnership with its trainer. Brock's Golem was a rolling boulder of destruction, and Misty's Starmie moved with a speed and precision that disabled opponents before they could even attack. But it was Sabrina who carved their path. She was no longer just a psychic powerhouse, she was a combat tactician. She saw the structural weaknesses, the strategic openings. She tore open ventilation shafts to create new routes, collapsed ceilings to block pursuing forces, and used her telekinesis to turn the very environment into a weapon. During a brief lull in a storage room, she stumbled, leaning against a crate, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The sheer sustained output of power was taking its toll. "You okay?" Ash asked, his own body aching from a dozen near misses. She nodded, wiping a trickle of blood from her nose, a common side effect of extreme psychic exertion. "I am operating at peak capacity. But my energy reserves are not infinite." She looked at him, her eyes sharp and clear despite the exhaustion. His offer. In your mind, for a moment, you considered it. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. Ash didn't deny it. He offered us safety. He offered us a weapon against Silas. It was the logical choice. And yet you refused, she said, a hint of a question in her voice. Because it wasn't our choice, Ash said, looking at his hands. It was his. We'd just be trading one cage for another. I'd rather be free and hunted than safe and owned. He met her gaze. I promised you we'd figure out who you are. Can't do that if you're somebody else's weapon. A complex emotion flickered in her eyes, gratitude, surprise, and a deep, resonant warmth that had nothing to do with logic or protocol. It was the quiet, dawning realization that he had refused ultimate power and safety, in part, for her. To protect her freedom, the very thing she was only just learning to embrace. The logic of your decision is questionable, she said, but a small, genuine smile touched her lips. But the conclusion? I find it acceptable. Their moment was broken as the door to the storage room began to glow red-hot. They're cutting through. Brock yelled. There's a data port here, Misty called out from a nearby terminal she had been frantically working on. It's connected to Giovanni's main server. If I can just get past the firewall, no time. Ash said. He looked at Sabrina. We need a way out. A big one. Sabrina looked at the reinforced concrete ceiling. Then she looked back at the glowing door. She closed her eyes. This will exhaust what I have left. Just do it, Ash said, trusting her completely. The entire room began to vibrate. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ceiling. With a final, agonizing groan, the ceiling gave way, and the floor of the room above it, the main gym arena, shattered. They were suddenly looking up at the stadium lights, a gaping hole leading directly into the main battlefield. Sabrina had created their own personal exit. With their Pokémon creating covering fire, they scrambled up through the rubble, emerging into the empty arena of the Viridian Gym just as Giovanni's forces broke into the room below. They didn't stop. They ran for the public exit, bursting out into the evening streets of Viridian City and disappearing into the crowds before the lockdown could take full effect. They had escaped. They had made an enemy of the most powerful man in Kanto. And Misty, in those frantic few seconds at the terminal, had managed to do the impossible. Later that night, huddled in a cheap, anonymous hotel room on the city's outskirts, Misty stared at her poke gear, her face pale in its glow. I got it, she breathed in disbelief. I don't know how, but I got in. It was only for a second before the system kicked me, but I downloaded a single encrypted file from Giovanni's private server. It was in a folder labeled, Competition, yes. Silas, Ash said, leaning over her shoulder. It's locked with a ridiculous level of encryption, Brock said, looking at the string of complex code. It would take years to break this. Perhaps not, Sabrina said. She placed her fingertips on the screen of the poke gear. She closed her eyes, her brow furrowed. She wasn't using brute force. She was, listening to the code. Her psychic senses traced the intricate pathways of the encryption, not as a mathematical problem, but as a complex, interlocking pattern. A psychic lock. It's a fractal algorithm keyed to a psychic frequency, she murmured. Not Silas's. This is older. Much older. Her eyes snapped open. I can't break it. But I can trace its origin. The frequency, it's a location. A place where the veil between worlds is thin. Where psychic energy resonates like a scar. It's not a complete address, but a set of coordinates. In Sinnoh. Near Solation Town. Solation Ruins. A place known for its connection to the unknown. That's it, Ash said, his voice grim. That's where Silas is. Or where he's going. We have to beat him there. The journey to the Sinnoh region was a desperate, clandestine affair. They stowed away on a cargo ship leaving from Vermilion City, hiding in a container full of machine parts. The days spent in the dark, cramped space were a crucible. They were fugitives from everyone, adrift on a dark ocean, with only a set of coordinates and the name of a madman to guide them. But the shared hardship forged them into something new. They were no longer just a trainer and his friends, with a psychic tag-along. They were a unit. A family, bound by shared danger and a common purpose. Ash's leadership, once instinctual, became refined. Brock's steadfastness was their rock, Misty's fiery spirit their motivation. And Sabrina, no longer an empress or a project, became their strategist, their early warning system, and in the quiet moments, their confidant. Her obsession with Ash had transformed completely. The desperate, possessive need was gone, replaced by a quiet, fierce loyalty and a deep, unspoken affection that was evident in every shared glance, every subtle shift to stand closer to him in the dark. It was a love forged not in protocol, but in fire and fear. They arrived in Sinnoh and made their way to Solation Town, a rustic village nestled in a valley. The town itself was peaceful, but a strange tension hung in the air. The locals spoke of the nearby ruins with a new reverence and fear, whispering of strange lights and eerie silences emanating from the ancient caves. The Solation ruins were a network of tunnels carved deep into a hillside, the walls covered in carvings of the unknown. The air inside was cold and still, heavy with the weight of centuries. And the psychic static was back. It was faint, an echo, but it was the same wrong silence from Celadon. "This is a place of power," Sabrina said, her hand resting on the cool stone wall. "The energy here is ancient. It's not just a habitat for the unknown, it's a wound. A scar in reality left by their passage ages ago. Silas isn't here to find them. He's here to read the scar." They ventured deeper into the ruins, the carvings on the walls becoming more complex, more frantic. They depicted not just unknown, but great battles, cosmic events, and a recurring motif of a swirling vortex. At the heart of the ruins, they found the source. It was a chamber, and in its center, there was no artifact, no machine. There was just a shimmering distortion in the air, a psychic wound that bled static into the world. It was a nexus, a place where the unknown's dimension was only a breath away. As Sabrina stepped toward it, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and trepidation, a voice echoed through the chamber. A calm, gentle, terrifyingly familiar voice. "I am impressed. I truly am." From the shadows on the far side of the chamber, a figure emerged. He materialized not by walking, but by coalescing from a swarm of swirling unknown that flowed together to form his body. It was Silas. His kind eyes crinkled in a warm smile, but the smile didn't reach them. It was the smile of a god observing an interesting species of insect. "To have evaded the Aegis Division and Team Rocket," he continued, his voice the soothing baritone from the video, "and to have tracked me here, you are far more resourceful than my initial projections allowed." He took a step forward, the unknown that comprised his form swirling and reforming around him like a living cloak. "Especially you." His gaze fell upon Sabrina, and for the first time, his smile seemed genuine, filled with a terrible, paternal sympathy. "Sabrina. The Empress of Saffron. I have studied your work. A crude but brilliant attempt. You saw the chaos of human emotion and sought to impose order. You built a world of perfect, silent peace. You and I, we are kindred spirits. Architects of a better world." "I'm nothing like you," Sabrina retorted, her voice cold. Ash, Brock, and Misty had their hands on their pokeballs, but they held back, waiting. This was something more than a battle. Silas chuckled, a soft, gentle sound. "Aren't you? You saw pain and sought to erase it. The only difference between us is scale. You built a dollhouse. I am building a paradise. Why settle for a single city when you can bring peace to the entire world?" He extended a hand, the unknown swirling around his arm. "Join me, Sabrina. Your power, combined with my knowledge and the will of the silent God, we can finish what you started. We can edit the source code of suffering itself. We can bring an end to all conflict, all pain, all messy, chaotic emotion. We can create a world of perfect, tranquil order." It was the ultimate temptation, a dark mirror of Giovanni's offer. Not power for its own sake, but power to achieve the very goal she had once so desperately sought. The power to enforce silence. Sabrina looked at the shimmering rift. She looked at the man who was both a monster and a reflection of her own darkest impulses. Then she looked at Ash, who stood ready to fight a god for her. She remembered the feeling of his hand in hers, the sound of his voice in the dark forest, the promise he had made. She stepped back, moving to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ash. Her choice was made. "I have learned," she said, her voice ringing with a conviction that came from her very soul, that a world without pain is also a world without joy. A world without chaos is a world without love. Your paradise is a prison. I will not help you build it. For the first time, Silas's calm, gentle facade broke. A flash of pure, cold fury crossed his face. The benevolent doctor vanished, replaced by the zealous god-king. A sentimental, illogical, and deeply disappointing conclusion, he hissed, his voice losing its warmth. You have been contaminated by the chaos. A flawed variable. He raised his hand. Then you are not a potential partner. You are simply another error that must be corrected. The air in the chamber grew impossibly heavy. The unknown around Silas began to spin, faster and faster, their individual forms blurring into a vortex of pure energy. The very walls of the ruin seemed to groan. Pikachu, Thunderbolt. Ash roared. Charmeleon, Flamethrower. Starmie, Hydro Pump. Golem, Rock Blast. A combined assault of 4 powerful Pokémon attacks shot across the chamber, a torrent of elemental fury aimed directly at Silas. They never reached him. Halfway across the chamber, the attack simply stopped. The electricity dissipated. The fire was snuffed out. The water turned to steam. The rocks crumbled into dust. Silas hadn't moved. He had just willed it so. Your conventional tactics are meaningless here, he stated, his voice now a distant, echoing thing. The unknown were a whirlwind around him, their chimes rising in pitch to a deafening shriek. I am not a trainer. I am an editor. And in this place, I control the source code. He pointed a finger at Ash's Charmeleon. The Pokémon's fiery tail suddenly extinguished. Charmeleon looked at its tail in confusion and terror, the source of its pride and power simply gone. Silas flicked his wrist. Golem, a creature of solid rock, suddenly became translucent, its form wavering like a heat haze. Brock cried out in alarm as his Pokémon began to derez, its very existence being unwritten. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Ash's aura, Sabrina's psychic might, they were powerful, but they operated within the established rules of reality. Silas was literally rewriting the rules of the fight as it happened. They were hopelessly, absolutely outmatched. Ash looked at Sabrina, his mind racing. He saw the terror in her eyes, but also a sliver of an idea. The rift. The psychic scar. It was the source of Silas's power here, his direct connection to the unknown dimension. The rift. Ash yelled, pointing. We can't beat him, but maybe we can close the door. It was a desperate, insane gamble. As Silas was occupied with unmaking Brock's golem, Ash and Sabrina focused their entire will on the shimmering tear in space. Sabrina unleashed a raw, powerful blast of telekinetic force, a battering ram of pure will aimed at twisting the rift shut. At the same time, Ash did something he had never consciously done before. He reached deep into himself, past the instinct, past the simple warmth, and grabbed his aura with both hands. He didn't project it as a shield or a feeling. He focused it into a coherent beam of pure, positive energy, the energy of life, of connection, of emotion itself, and fired it at the rift. Their powers, one of mind, one of spirit, struck the psychic scar simultaneously. The result was explosive. The rift, a wound of silent, ordered nothingness, reacted violently to the sudden, chaotic influx of pure life energy. It didn't close. It destabilized. It flared, buckled, and then erupted outward, not with energy, but with a wave of pure spatial distortion. Silas, caught completely by surprise, roared in fury and pain as the wave struck him. The unknown that formed his body scattered, their hive-mind connection momentarily shattered. For a split second, he was just a man again, vulnerable. The distortion wave hit the walls of the chamber, and the ancient stone structure began to collapse. Boulders the size of cars rained down from the ceiling. "Run!" Brock yelled, recalling his wavering golem just in time. They didn't need to be told twice. They turned and fled, sprinting back through the collapsing tunnels as the heart of the Solation ruins imploded behind them. They burst out of the entrance into the late afternoon sun, gasping for breath, just as the entire hillside groaned and settled, the entrance to the ruins sealing itself under tons of rock and earth. They were alive. They were wounded, terrified, and utterly shaken. But they were alive. They had faced a god and survived. But they hadn't won. They had only succeeded in angering him. And they had done it by revealing a weapon he never would have anticipated, the combined, resonant power of an empath and an empress. They had a way to fight back. But Silas knew it now, too. The real battle was just beginning. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.